All right, if everybody is all set, we will resume. I guess I'll let you take it back over, and then I think there's some other councillors that have some items to go through. Okay. So, Councillor Van Passen, I know you had a list of some items you wanted to work your way through. Did you want to start us off?
I have a list, but it's like 20 pages, so like I could highlight a few things, or I could talk more in big picture thing on a few items first.
Sure.
I'll start with this little book here. All these fantastic programs that we have from the Community Services Department. Yoga classes, babysitting, not babysitting, I shouldn't say that word, but programs in the summer for children, all those things. Why are we in that business? Like a couple of weeks ago, we gave an award to a new entrepreneur who gives yoga classes in Norfolk County, and at the same time, we have a government that's competing with the private sector. And I know this is not an issue, I could nitpick each of the little budget items, but is that a direction that we should be looking at of getting out of some of those services that we're not really required or need to provide when the private sector is available to do that? And maybe I just leave that for some thought later on, or whether any other councillors have opinions on that.
Well, Mr. Clerk, it's something that we've been talking about since day one that we've been in here. So has there been any progress on that front?
Yes, we've had some discussions with program staff and specifically on the yoga, making some head there. And my general comment on, oops, I think I'm shutting off here. I think my general comments on the rest of our programming are, historically, a municipality has offered programs that fill niches or gaps that aren't filled by the private sector. I mean, we fill niches that, you know, the community needs this. We make a community out of it. Our summer program, for instance, for kids, you know, everything from kayaking to swimming to day camps are things that are, you know, our children, skills they need to learn. They have a good time. The parents are working, that sort of thing. So could the private sector come in and fill some of these shoes that we fill? I won't say not. It's just taking some time to get to the point where we, I think, have to have dialogue with the users and the community at large and say, you know, what can the daycares handle in the summer? Who can fill this? Who can fill that? Because I'm just afraid if we drop things cold turkey, you're going to get a lot of calls on my whole summer's based on my kids being there for 8 weeks, 10 weeks, that sort of thing, and now I've got nowhere to put the children. A lot of families we get, you know, from the youngest to the oldest, they come through and they tell their friends that sort of thing. So it's definitely up for discussion. I just don't have any concrete answers to how we get from that point, being in them now, to not being in them.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that would be my point. The time to start that discussion would be now. That it's not something that we're just going to eliminate all those programs in 2019. Never my thought, never my intention, but it's time to start starting a dialogue with the private sector to try to take over some of those programs and maybe get out of a business that, you know, maybe we shouldn't be in the first place.
I agree, and I think for some that there's a transition period that we need to build in, but there are certainly some, not to keep harping on it, but as you know, Councillor Van Passen just pointed out, we gave an entrepreneurial award to a yoga class, and we have yoga classes going on in Norfolk County. So we've been talking about this one for months now, so hopefully we can start to see some progress of us getting out of those areas. Councillor Huffman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Councillor Van Passen. Do you have any more specific kind of thoughts on this in terms of other than the summer programs, and you mentioned the yoga, are there any other, like, while you were going through it? I just need a little bit more detail, I think, and information.
Councilor Rabbit brought this up yesterday. We have a fantastic package here. Read through it, and yeah, there's a lot of they're all worthwhile programs. I'm never going to argue that. It's just a matter of whether it should be a government or a municipality that delivers those programs if they're available through the private sector, or if we give the nod to the private sector that we'd be willing to step back if they fill in. That's a direction I want to look into.
Okay. Well, I think I can speak directly to the fact that there are absolutely no summer childcare programs that would be a full-time program that Norfolk County offers. There's absolutely no overlap there with the private sector. There's none.
Yeah, a 2-week day camp to go kayaking, to learn those kind of things. Is that childcare or is it not childcare? I'm not going to get into semantics on it, but
Yeah.
there are groups out there that provide those tours, those services, and things like that. So why not step back or start the dialogue and get there down the road? Again, I'm not looking at cutting any dollars from 2019 budget on any of those programs, but I think it's time to start looking in that direction, that down the road we gradually step back and allow the private sector to fill those gaps.
Councillor Michelli.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I certainly take Councillor Van Passen's point, and I think we have talked about this quite a bit. I guess what we have to kind of keep in mind is I think we need to strike a bit of a balance between, sort of interfering with some people's entrepreneurial opportunities by providing duplicate services, but also at the same time keeping in mind that some of the programs that are provided by the county are more affordable for people than they might be in the private sector. So I think we kind of have to be a little bit conscious of sort of the two sides to that equation.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Building on this a little bit, I would agree with Councillor Michelli's comments there. I wonder if it would be in the best interest to further the dialogue to actually have maybe an open forum with business owners and staff and start to have this conversation, collect input and intel, and we could get a better grasp on which side of the spectrum we are competing with said private sector on. Additionally, I also wonder about some kind of, thinking off the cuff here, an application form where you could then submit your details to the county. If I am teaching a yoga class, this is where I teach and when I teach it, and we'd be able to cross-reference with what the county does if the business owner is interested in providing that information to the county. And lastly, I was at the council meeting with last council term, and I recall previous councillor Haight had mentioned working on some type of subsidy program with maybe a ballot for yoga classes, so the county would be able to help individuals who would then want to take these classes at a lower rate instead of hosting the class, creating a subsidized system. So I would be interested in more information about all this, and I wonder if some type of open forum or getting the private sector together with our staff would be beneficial.
The other piece, especially in some of these athletic programs and stuff, as we look at increasing services in some of the more remote areas, like St. Williams and Port Rowan and so on, is that rather than having county employees going to deliver these services, that we look to these private sector businesses. For example, the yoga studio here in Simcoe being contracted to go to a facility in Port Rowan and would be out there to deliver that class and so on if Norfolk County had a facility for them to use. So that way you're spreading the services across the county, but at the same time you're supporting the private sector business as opposed to all of the other funding that goes into a county employee to be able to deliver those. Anything, Councilor Rabbits?
Thank you, Mayor Chop. And I guess my question through you to our clerk is, do we have a committee that would be, in your mind, appropriate to review those areas where we may be offering a duplication of services or we may be competing with the private sector? because I think it'd be worthwhile for us to, further explore these opportunities, possibly creating a referral program, where if we do discover that these classes are being offered in the private sector, with the intention of not having that person lose their space, either in yoga or through childcare, that they could possibly be referred back to the private sector, with the intention of making sure that, the individual isn't losing out on this service at the end of the day, and maybe it could help us back out of some of these programs. And I was just wondering if maybe that could potentially be handled at a committee level. We could also have private individuals maybe prepare a deputation to that committee, rather than having this take up council time or be a discussion that's being had at this table. And I was just wondering if our clerk had any response to that suggestion, that maybe this is something we could refer to at the committee level.
Through the mayor to Councillor Rabbits, that's a great point. And I would suggest that your best option would be to maybe refer it to the Council Program Review Committee that was discussed last night at Council and Committee, and will be approved next week. But that committee is currently structured and ready to go, so I think that would be a good committee to refer it to.
Councillor Van Passen?
Well, just to Councillor Michelle's point that these are affordable programs, but, I looked at line item 5550, fee subsidy recreation, $1.225 million. That's why it's more affordable. Those are levy dollars. We're doing it for our youth. We're doing it for all the right reasons. But is that an acceptable level? And can we provide the same service by lowering that level and having the private sector step in? That's all I'm asking, is that we look into it.
Councillor Columbus, then yourself.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question was similar. It's, how much is the county subsidizing a certain one of these programs? If it's break even, I'm really not that concerned, but if we're subsidizing it and we've got competition out there in the community, then I see it as an issue. Mr. Cridlin, can you comment on the subsidies of some of these programs?
Sure, through the chair. It would vary from program to program, and I don't have that information in front of me. I guess my general comments would be, obviously, most things that go on in a municipal pool, I don't think we're competing with the private sector because the pools aren't here. Any grass-based, field soccer, lacrosse, baseball, that sort of thing, I don't think we're competing. Obviously, ice arenas, if the private sector wanted to get in the arena business, I got 5 for sale. I don't think they would. But so when I boil it down to, there's the dance classes, the jazz, some senior activities, the daycares that we talked about. I'm just wondering, depending on the direction from council today, I do like the clerk's comments if it went to the committee of the review of services. We could get a list together very quickly with what we offer. And out of that, I think probably 75% of that are just going to be municipality are the only ones that can supply it. And then we could look at the handful, and whether a handful is 10 items or 5, I don't have that with me. And then I think bring it forward to that committee, and then they can decide that, hey, this is something we should look at, or what should we look at, or in the grand scheme, it's not that big. But I think it definitely, we need to get to that point. So I agree with the clerk.
Sounds like the right path, Mr. Cridlin.
Okay, next item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to bring up, before we get too much into the afternoon, I wanted to bring up an item that we do need to discuss today, and that is the proposal by the Police Services Board for the roadside signage. I believe we did defer that to today. So I'm not sure, Kathy, if you wanted to give a little bit of a background.
During the Police Services Board, they did a deputation and they wanted to purchase 30 pole-mounted solar-powered speed watch signs staged over 5 years. at an approximate cost of $7,750 per unit, and one mobile trailer speed sign at an approximate cost of $17,000 per unit. It's generally approximately $250,000 over the 5 years. The first year would be a little more, it'd be around $57,000 because it would include the one-time purchase of the trailer. And that was the request of the Police Services Board at that time.
Councillor Van Passen.
I will say the same thing I said when they presented that report. Right in the report, it says they are required to do a review, and this may be one of the recommendations that comes out of that report. So until such time as we have that review done, why would we spend the money if this may be one of the recommendations they make? So I would defer that until after their review is completed.
Okay, so there's a motion for deferral on the floor. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Michelli, and all those in favor? That is carried. Next item, Councillor Van Passen.
I got more. Another one I looked at is Ride Norfolk. Again, it's an amazing program. It's required. It's also all those things, but it cost on average $34 a ride last year for the amount of service. So, and I noticed that the advertising budget is increased by $13,000, and that we're going to be starting a program running to Brantford 3 times a day. But I'm hoping we can get some of the ridership up to sort of bring the cost down, because it costs the same to drive that bus around, whether there's one person on it or 10, and hopefully we can get some more use out of it for the same dollars that we're spending now. Again, it's not something that's going to change the 2019 budget, but hopefully it will get better in the future so that it looks like it's actually worthwhile from a financial point of view, not just from a lifestyle point of view.
I think this is a frustrating piece for a lot of people in Norfolk, because this comes back to this centralized component in Simcoe, and it's obviously, we all know it's very difficult to run a bus service across a vast county like we have. Councillor Martin and I had a really interesting conversation with Mayor Hewitt at Roma, and I've received several emails, I don't know if anybody else has, about why we don't have Uber in town and so on. What they are doing in Haldeman is they're actually subsidizing that program with some of the money that they have for that transportation component to make their Ubers and so on more affordable in some of these areas. So it's not necessarily the right idea. It's just, it's something that's out there to possibly consider again in the future. I was thinking it might be worthwhile even, having a further conversation about that with him, or having him come here one day and, share what they're doing in Haldeman to address very similar issues that we have. Councillor Huffman?
Thank you, Mayor Chop. I think it's really important when we're talking about some of these, what some individuals deem as soft services, that there's a lot of stakeholders at the table when it comes to these services, and that maybe to, I don't know, to someone who doesn't have a lot of experience when you're dealing with the socioeconomic diversity and the geographical diversity of Norfolk County. And for a lot of individuals who don't have a vehicle, and when people don't have a lot of access to other services, when we're talking about things like rec programs, et cetera, and when we're looking at that, we have on the table right now a committee to build a multi-million-dollar community hub, that this is community engagement. These things engage your citizens, whether they're, whatever their tax base is. And it's really important to just not, think, okay, well, yeah, Uber sounds like a great idea. People can get, somewhere quicker. That's not the intent of Ride Norfolk, and I just think there's a lot more to this discussion. So.
I agree. There's more to the discussion. There was no idea that I'm throwing on the table. I'm just commenting on the fact that there are other things going on in other neighboring communities that are able, the idea is to reach more people, even more people, that don't have access to rides and don't have access to cars and so on to be able to get places. I want to see more people be able to access the services, so not cutting the funding, but maybe there's ways to use it in a more strategic way. I don't know what that way is, just it's something to explore. Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to ask, I believe it's Mr. Crillin's department looks after the busing, right? Councillor Van Passen mentioned $34 a ride. Can you share some comments and thoughts about the program with councillors here?
Through the chair to councillors. As far as I'm looking at Nikki Sloat, who is actually manager of that group, I don't have a lot of numbers and facts and figures with me today to talk about the $34 per ride thing, but I can tell you that to follow up with Councillor Huffman, I mean, when I was in Public Works, I was involved in the infancy of this getting Ride Norfolk together, and it was working with our community. There were a lot of folks that needed this subsidized transportation. I know a lot of it was around some of the work that Marlene Miranda and her group do, transfers, people that need a service like this. So Norfolk, Ride Norfolk was put into place. It has changed and morphed. We've changed locations. We've changed where we do pickups. We also have the South Coast service in the summertime, which runs along the lake shore, and it's kind of more of a tourism draw, and not necessarily, it's kind of an offshoot of what Ride Norfolk originally started from. Yeah, as times change, society's needs change, and I think at the time, things like Uber and things like that weren't in place or as common as they were. So Ride Norfolk does fill a niche for Norfolk County. We do hear of folks that, that's their lifeline. Without Ride Norfolk, they couldn't hold their part-time job. They couldn't do this. They couldn't do that. So we always are looking for ways to be inventive. Obviously, the grant application to go to Brantford opens up a whole other thing where you could jump on a bus in Simcoe and you could end up at Brantford at Darlington Station. You could get to the greater GTA or west or west of here, I should say. All kinds of things. It is growing in that fact. Lots of reports with the council, and I guess that's about all I can say. There is a need for it now in its present form. It will morph, it will change as we move forward, because it's based here to serve the community on what they need.
Do you have any indication of how much it's subsidized by the county versus what the province and federal government kicks in?
Through the chair, I believe you give us a few minutes on that. Nikki Sloat should have an answer.
Sorry, Councillor Columbus, did you?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I'm well aware the vast majority of that funding is from the gas tax, I think, that we get from the province. I think basically the levy part that is the manager's wages of around the $50,000. I know all of those things, but it's still money. Let's get better use of that money is my point. And again, to Councillor Huffman, I'm not an evil person, but soft services maybe not my area of expertise. That's why I'm so happy that we have the expertise in the room now, and if we can get a little discussion started on to get better use of the things that we currently have, that's all I'm looking forward to. So.
In response to Councillor Van Passen, did not imply you were an evil person.
Okay, so Councillor Columbus, you can just let me know when you've got the answer for him. I'm thinking maybe we should get back to the actual items here on the budget. That's all good discussion, but are there any particular, because I could start pulling out a few if...
Okay, a real item of reduction, the water and wastewater from the different departments. We reduced that by 30,000, but the total increase, if you add up all the departments, is 79,000. I think each department just built in the increase, and since there is none, I think there's a bit more room to lop it off the totals. Like community services, the increase is 65,500. Public works, the increase is 11,800. The paramedics, there was an increase of 2,700. So I think there is some more room
We've got on page 4-4, that's the total water and wastewater there, right? So we're showing a 34.6% increase this year, and we froze rates.
Fire department had 21,000 in there too.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we actually took a deep look into that and wanted to make sure we did the appropriate reduction. With that budget line item, there's two factors involved. There's the amount of usage that we're predicting and also the rates. So the $30,000 is related to the frozen rates. The other increases that you see there is based on the expected usage in 2019. One example, I believe, is the Eva Brooke Donnelly Museum. Now that we're taking care of that building, that is part of that increase that you see there. So any further reductions, I would caution, it would probably end up in a deficit situation.
Thank you, Mayor. One more quick one is the amount we're paying in bank charges. Community Service Department, $52,000 in bank service charges. EMS has $19,000 in bank service charges. It's about time to go renegotiate the deal with our commercial banks. If, like, the total bill is $115,000 for bank charges, that seems rather exorbitant to me, and I don't know, I'm sure there is an explanation somewhere about why we pay so much to banks in just charges.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Van Passen. So those charges include a multitude of different items. They include the monthly rental for your debit machines. I believe there are some areas that take credit cards. So those bank charges include the credit card fees, which could be 2 or 3% of the price. The actual bank charges for the bank that we use is minimal. I don't want to divulge what that is in public. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do. However, when it comes to bank charges on that line item, it's more than just what we have in bank fees. It's also the fees for the miscellaneous machinery and credit card charges and so on and so forth. The bank charges are minimal, and where the banks generally make their revenue from the county is in the various GICs that we have with the various banks. At one point, there was a concern about doing an RFP for bank services because we've always used the same bank over the years, and we want to level the playing field, sort of thing. However, the actual fees that the banks get through our contract is minimal compared to the short-term investment policy that we have, and basically if we have enough cash flow for a GIC, we let all the local banks know, and whoever has the best rate, they're the ones that gets our business for those 30, 60, or 90 days. So hopefully that answers your question.
If I just kind of start back at the beginning with some of the stuff, although I've got one page that's out of order, but Mr. Suchenkov, in terms of salaries, I thought that you had come up with an ingenious solution for a reduction there. Maybe ingenious solution isn't the word, but.
To you, Madam Mayor, it depends on what you're specifically alluding to.
Well, within the salaries themselves, you had provided me with a number, I just can't remember off the top of my head, of because of a new policy implementation from your department, that it was actually going to save money. You looked at what the cost was last year, so I'm assuming that was baked into the salaries.
Madam Mayor.
I pulled the email up, I meant to.
Okay, I think you're alluding to the historical practice as it was in our policy of doing vacation payouts for some of our non-union staff. Is that what you're referring to?
And we had a figure of how that had trended historically and what that was costing the county. And so now with the new policy, theoretically, we should be able to, if that would have had to have been built in the budget. We weren't having budget overruns every year in salaries, I'm assuming, because of that.
So I'll answer the question in some respects. It was actually an email that we were into the non-union staff as far as communicating that change in policy. I think I just circulated the correspondence yesterday to SLT so that they knew. So for the non-union folks that are paying attention, that are finding out through our conversation as opposed to through my
Well,
email.
you know what, we can skip it if you want. I'm sorry, I got the impression that you had done that a few weeks ago.
No,
so
no, I just wanted to go through the proper thing with my SLT peers. The red light is on, but it won't let me talk into it. So in looking at a couple of years and what that experience has looked like, that's been anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000. And I just want to caution that I think historically that's been sort of funded from gapping dollars as a result of vacancies and sort of people retiring or people being absent and not getting those funds. And certainly with the modification in the policy and the discontinuation of this practice, those funds will not be used in that way.
Councillor Van Passen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I did ask this question with the treasurer, discuss this with the treasurer, but last year, our budget, we actually came in on the total salaries and benefits. The budget 66.9 million. We came in $1 million under budget, yet there's an increase of 2.4 million. And I've yet to get an explanation. I'm sure we built in the cost of living factor and all those things, but that's a $3 million swing year over year, and that seems a little high to me.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Van Passen. So the high-level reason for the forecasted actuals being lower than budget is just strictly due to vacancies in our full-time equivalents. We've had, Mr. Shlechenkov can expand on this, but I'm pretty sure his staff have been very busy in the recruitment process trying to fill these vacancies. I could use finance as an example. We've had a vacancy for about 6 or 7 months now with one of our advisor positions, just having difficulty filling it. And I'm sure there's other examples like that. In health and social services, I believe there is quite a bit of vacancy there. But that is the main reason. So like I've mentioned before, we're budgeting at current service levels and the FTEs that we expect to have. And that's why the increase is there. The increase is there related to the contract negotiations. And the reason why the 2018 forecasted actuals are lower than budget is just strictly because of the amount of vacancies we've had.
Councillor Columbus?
Madam Mayor, you raised the subject of salaries tonight, and we got into talking about salary gapping, savings there. Where are we right now with replacement of the CAO position and other positions? Are there a lot that are sitting empty right now, or are we procuring, advertising those positions?
Well, I think the direction that we provided at the last meeting was to hold off on any of the hiring with the exception of the student positions, which had been communicated even to Mr. Krebs well in advance to, in the face of any of those discussions, to still go ahead and recruit for the student positions. So I think that's something that we need to come back to and see, if staff is determined, if some of those positions maybe aren't so necessary in the face of the, financial position of the county. If we have this much in gapping dollars and we're surviving without some of these positions being filled and the county is moving along, are they necessary? I've recently received some data from other counties. Haldeman County is operating at around 300 members. Oxford at a population, and they're 45,000 people. Oxford's at 110,000 people, and I believe they have 800 staff. So they're 50 more staff than us, and they're almost double the population. And I know it's a tough pill to swallow, and we're not going to be restructuring or doing anything like that today. The purpose of the discussion of holding off on hiring for some of those positions was to determine whether or not were all of them absolutely necessary. If we're functioning, if some of them are empty for 8 months and we're carrying on and business is getting done, maybe it's not as necessary as we think it is. And maybe our resources could be better allocated to other areas. So that really was just the purpose of that conversation. And again, not in terms of student hiring.
Under the Municipal Act, are we obligated to fill the CAO position?
We are not obligated to have a CAO under the
No one
Municipal
had
Act.
told me we were, so.
Nope. There's no obligation, and I think obviously we will have some discussions on how to move forward with that. I think that it's been a great time for all members of our senior leadership team have been here for a while, or most have been here for some time, and they're all handling their portfolios. Jill is still putting together the council packages as she's always been done, and I think it's giving us a little bit of time to get our house in order and then begin a search for the right person to come to Norfolk County. But I don't think we're, in any way, I don't see the operations as having changed or suffered. And
Thank you.
Any more on salaries there, Chris, before I move to the next one? Councilor Van Passen, sorry.
Answered.
Oh, sure. It's-
Through the mayor, that's right, Norfolk? Yeah. Yeah, we subsidize Ride Norfolk about 36%. And I'm not sure if we have an answer. I do know that there are, okay, thank you, Nikki. There are no publicly funded transportation systems that work at 100%. I think the average or the standard level is anywhere between 40 to 50% subsidization. So Norfolk is on the good side of that, slightly under the 40. And just talking to Nikki Sloat here, I'm thinking we probably should table a report in June. And the reason I say that is this is a new council who may know some about Ride Norfolk, but the report could give some background. We also have Blair Sylvester, who is new in the position for the last 4 or 5 months. We also have the expansion to Brantford that I talked about. So yeah, I'm going to say that we'll try to get a report in here for June, information on Ride Norfolk. We can go through some of the numbers, some of the ridership, you know, who we cater to, and some industrial or industry numbers on where we rank with the others. So I think that'd be great information for council to have to further discuss the future Ride Norfolk.
Okay, so I guess we might as well address, it's 140, the hiring situation right now then. So there was no motion. It's not that we need another motion right now. It was just a direction to staff last time. Has there been anything further, Mr. Suchenkov, into those, all of the positions that are available, again, excluding the student positions that are, that maybe, and again, this doesn't need to be something today where you list out particular positions, but in the, face of the constraints that the county's facing, are there some positions that as we look to a future of a potential restructuring that maybe are worthwhile to not fill currently?
To you, Madam Mayor. So the status as far as that review right now, sort of in respecting that there was no resolution of council passed, is SLT has reviewed the requests to post jobs, and basically based on conversations at council and statements from yourself, have either, depending on if these positions were critically needed for the 20th, in anticipation that we would get clarification or clear direction from council at the time, we've, out of the 50 some odd that we received, sort of held about 21 positions pending the outcome of those conversations at council. We did not have direction to review the efficacy, whether these positions should exist at all, or to do any corporate review, or to have any discussions surrounding whether we need to be cutting any positions from existence.
So I myself would be comfortable of leaving the number as is, and if we have a surplus in that area later on in the year, that's fine, and leaving the discretion to Mr. Sluchenkov and his team as they kind of see the direction that we're potentially headed down the road and determining whether or not each of the positions is, if they were to make any changes to that. Comments?
To you, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure how that would actually work itself out from an application perspective. So the positions we were holding were pending council meeting of today in terms of what future direction from council would look like. If we were to extend that into whether we need those positions at all, we're essentially in a situation where there's general managers from a variety of areas who have thoughts and perspectives in their areas of expertise surrounding service delivery in those areas. So I'm struggling as to how one would operationalize some of the things I'm hearing.
So would this be something that yourself and senior leadership at one of your upcoming meetings would maybe be able to discuss? Again, fill the positions that you need to fill. For example, I know with Catherine Bristol retiring, I totally agree that, you know, somebody needs to be downstairs managing the records and so on. And so, you know, again, it's discretionary that you guys can make those decisions, but it would also be prudent at this point, I think, for senior leadership to get together and have a meeting and say, okay, are there some of these that maybe aren't necessary right now? And then bring those back to council at another date. So the freeze or the direction would be effectively lifted and put to your discretion. Councillor Columbus?
Well, my feeling is I think it's important for council to know what positions are vacant, how long have they been vacant, and which ones are critical to fill to make the county function the way it should function. That's what I'd like to get a report on that.
Okay, I think that's great.
Okay. One thing I would want to see is our staff getting burned out because we're overloading them with work.
So I was proposing them filling the positions that they believed they needed. So you want to hold off on that though and get the report?
I think they probably are quite aware what positions are vacant right now, and I think we can get a report fairly quickly.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if the ask from council is to provide a list of vacancies and justifications and rationalizations for each of those positions, those would probably take some time, because I think the general managers as a broad principled perspective would feel that all our current FT staffing is there for a reason and for a certain service level. So to answer the immediate question, I think a request of we'd like all your vacancies and those justifications for each of those vacancies would take some amount of time to get back to council with.
So that's why I'm proposing right now, letting them go and fill the positions that they believe that they need to fill. I have confidence in senior leadership from my meetings with them at SLT that they understand the future direction of this council. They understand that we are potentially looking at a restructuring going forward, and that it's better to leave if there's some positions that may be restructured out, that rather than fill them and then terminate a person, you know, that we consider it. But I do have full confidence in their abilities to make those decisions right now, moving forward.
I did not feel that that's the way you were interpreting it, but I support that too, then. Fill the positions that need filling, that are critical. Thanks.
Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Cridlin looked like he wanted to jump in at one point. I'm wondering if that's, just want to give him the opportunity there.
Thank you to the chair, and I think Mayor Chop has answered some of the question. I was going to ask or add, as acting CEO in February, I kept track of these positions, and a large number of the 21 are recent retirements, people moving on, different municipalities, different jobs. Some of them as little as 2 or 3 days ago, a week ago. So we just kind of ballparked those for the fact that we weren't sure where things are going to go on the 20th. So I think staff are quite relieved that we will have discretion on these, because I think the only thing I'll add is we're into February in this year. We're only into February, but we are into February, and our 2019 budget is based on having these folks supplying these services, supplying these needs to the community, and I think we can look at them. We may have a few, but I think the majority of them are going to be needed for business as usual. I just wanted to add that. That's the reason we ballparked them. We weren't sure the way the 20th were going to go, and some were just retirements that had come up, some a month away. We do need direction today because they're going to be leaving us in a month from the time we post, and our services are built on those folks being there for 2019 anyway. So I totally agree with Mayor Chop.
So we're good then with that piece? Good, Councillor Van Passen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with your point of view that I've already been impressed by our staff and the innovative ways that they found to immediately fill needs, to readjust some duties, to fill the positions that are required. And I have full confidence that they will do exactly what the intent of this council is, and fill the ones with the immediate needs, and look at options on other ones, and let them go and do their job, I think. So, thanks.
And even if any amount helps at this point, right? So even if it is only a couple of those positions, that's helping move us in the right direction. So, Councillor Taylor, sorry, I'm thinking you had your hand. You're good. Okay.
Just just as we're kind of on the topic around here, just to ensure that staff do what council wants, specifically with the CAO position, is we were working on a staff report for council, but what I hear here today is leave it with council, and at some point you'll bring forward a motion on your own to address that. Correct. Is that everybody's on the same understanding?
Okay. Any next item, or should I go to another one? Just some random kind of municipal creep items. So let's see, on bottom of 4.2, we've got item 4104, gift shop stock. Every year we're seeing 6.6, 4.9, and then it jumps to a 10%, and now we're at a 21.1% increase this year. Have the price of baseball caps gone up that much?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So if there's questions on these line items, we have a very high-level explanation of what they are. However, if you want more, if you want to peel back the layers a little bit, then it would be up to the GMs to comment on that. But the gift shop stock, that increase, it's related to multiple museums' increase in sales. So I imagine there would be an offsetting revenue item on that. But since it is related to museums, I don't know the further details on that. I imagine some of it might be related to the Eva Brooke Donnelly Museum that we acquired as well.
So, okay, so most of it's related. Would it be possible, do the museums, who's on the museum, Councillor Michelli? Would it be possible maybe at one of your committee meetings to try to get a sense of, what their revenues are on these items? Are they selling that much more, kind of thing? And maybe in other business at some council have a little discussion about what you learned?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that would be a good idea. I actually have a couple of those meetings next week, so I can bring that up.
It just would be nice when it's such a huge jump to have some sort of justification, or at least see the revenue line that offsets that. The next one, Mr. Johnson, we've got something like library materials 4111. Now, these are obviously aren't the library materials, or are they?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's a general term for the county actually purchasing materials, like books and so on. That increase is mostly attributed to a one-time purchase of new building codes. It is offset by some small reductions through some other areas where we've reduced the budget line item.
Sorry, what was the purchase of?
My notes say new building codes must be through the building division, which that would be offset by Bill 124 funding as well.
Codes? Oh, building code. Okay. Couple further down, equipment supplies in general for the county. 255%? Is that some?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The notes I have here is that's mainly attributed to firefighter rescue equipment of $65,000, and it's offset by some reduction in operating capital, some small dollars in some other areas, but it's mostly attributed to fire and rescue.
Mr. Cridlin, do you have any, I would say pretty big jump all of a sudden to be thrown in that it wouldn't have been some kind of, capital item or something if it
Through
was
the mayor to
equipment.
county council. Yeah, there's no new items that I'm aware of. And I think some of it comes down to funding perhaps. If I don't have the document in front of me, so I'm sorry, but I know sometimes if it's funded through a reserve, it doesn't show up on the levy side. So I'm not sure if finance can comment on that. But other than that, I'm not aware of any new fire equipment. They're all based on the 20-year schedule for tankers, rescues, that sort of thing. As they come up, they're replaced. And I believe in capital there were 2 of the, I'll call them officer cars, minivans, trucks, and I believe those came out of the reserve, so those should impact that number as well.
Hopefully this will help. Matt Hilson just mentioned that 65,000 was actually reallocated from another line item, so you should see an offsetting reduction. I believe the project code was 8905. Okay. So that's an accounting exercise we did to just put those purchases in the right buckets.
Great. 4-4, meeting expenses. 2016 was a decrease of 10%, went back up 10% in 2017, was a 22% increase in 2018, and it's another 22%, almost 21.3% increase in, 27.2% increase, 30% increase in 2019. I had a meeting the other day with the CEO of the hospital, Kelly Ifsan, and she talked about budget constraints over at the hospital and how they're running a flat organization. And she said, it's got to the point, there's no cookies at meetings anymore over here. And it seems like an extraordinary increase even this year, how we've gotten up to 153,000 in meeting expenses. So I'm wondering if we might be able to make a reduction and at least even hold it at this year's amount. I for one have been to, meetings here where there's a lot of food being thrown out in different places and so on. So I think every department, council meetings included, could all make an effort to ensure that those reductions are met.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, you're right. Most of that increase is due to council meetings. We used, previously, we used not as expensive food, I guess you can say. And as well, some of that increase, I can take a bit of blame on that. The finance division also supplies catering to today's meeting, for example, and the 2 days in January. And what we previously budgeted for were for a set amount of days, and we found over the last few years those days have expanded. So the more days we use for budget deliberations and so on, the more catering that we need to do. So that's part of the reason, and this particular line item, we're trying to bring the budget up to previous actuals. You can see we had a forecast of 145.6, and yes, we are budgeting a little bit more than that, but you can see the 2018 budget was only 120,000. So we had we're forecasting a deficit in that area for 2018. So to reduce it by 32,700, my opinion, I think that's a bit much. Perhaps if we reduced it by $10,000 and we had different food for the council meetings, then I think that would be reasonable. Yes, so through you, Madam Mayor, that also includes if there's a room rental needed and things of that nature. So basically anything related to a meeting would go into that area.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I picked up one of those things out of Development and Cultural Services, like the meeting expenses there is 50,300. That's an increase of 7,800. And I know that we have been working on official plans. We've been working on the zoning bylaw, and there'd probably be, I assumed, a bunch of need for a bunch of special meetings on those kind of things. But we're done with that, and I was wondering why there's such an increase from that department as well. So that's almost more than a third of the total budget across the board.
To the mayor, if you can just give us a few minutes, we'll get you some answers on that.
While they're looking that up, maybe I could just ask, how did dog tags go to the library, just out of curiosity? What's the history on that?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Maybe Chris Baird can answer. I do know that the dog licensing rate is fairly low. It's about, a couple years ago, it was estimated to be about 30% of dogs, but yeah, Mr. Baird might have the detail.
Well, the reason I ask is it's not fairly low in Norfolk County. In fact, I believe Councillor Columbus, wasn't it you as well that had received, or was it Councillor Rabbit, some emails about the dog tags, and that it's every year, and it's like 25 a year versus other municipalities, it's a one-time shot, and that's it. And it's just, I'm a little bit concerned when we don't have control of the library board, and there's a user fee that, to me, I mean, you should be encouraging, if it wasn't every single year, people would be more likely to come and register their dog for 25 bucks. But if they come and register their dog one year, they know they have to keep going and paying it every single year. So it's just kind of, just while we had a minute,
Sure,
curious
no,
on the history.
I don't know the exact fees. Let's just say they're 30 bucks. I know if you get it early, you pay a lesser price after February. It's a few more dollars. The libraries and the local pet shops all sell dog tags. We give them $3 or $4 per tag. It's convenient for dog owners to pick up their tag if they happen to be going to the pet shop for food or supplies or whatever. The libraries, it was a nice gesture because they're open later and they're open on Saturdays. So it was just a good partnership. We used to previously, 10 plus years ago, send the form home to every elementary school kid in Norfolk County right before Christmas. And we had a pretty good success rate. But it's been up and down, as Mr. Grosel said.
To fill for their dog tags, the kids?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it is a Christmas present. But there's been, over the years, there's been many ways of trying to get those numbers up. The goal there was to make sure that we could directly offset the cost of our animal control contract, which we do, but I would agree, there's 30 to 40% of dog owners get a tag, the others don't.
Well, I probably wouldn't be so inclined either at 25 bucks a year.
Well, if the purpose of that is if your dog is lost, you can be reunited with it, and if you've lost a pet once, it's well worth it.
That may be, but why is our municipality 25 a year and other municipalities are $25 on a one-shot deal? That's my only, it's not that I'm disagreeing
Yeah,
with the
no,
program or
I'm
the
not aware what
benefits
others
of-
charge. It's a rate that this council approves in the user fee bylaw, and that may be something that could be further looked into, that whole animal control program. Unlike the canine control, the animal control, the dog tags offset the cost of that program. The cat control that you discussed earlier today is not funded at all, so that's a direct levy impact. So anyway, hopefully that answers some questions.
Thanks. Councilor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And the worst part is you can't even go buy a license somewhere else, put it on your dog, because if you visit Norfolk County for more than 2 weeks, you're supposed to run down and buy a Norfolk County dog tag license while you're on vacation as well. So.
Councilor Columbus.
Well, this has come up at every budget meeting. If someone else doesn't bring it up, I bring it up about the fact that only 40% of the dog owners actually get a tag each year. So we're missing out on a tremendous income, but maybe we do need a report from Mr. Bayer's department sometime over the course of next year, before budget, to find out if we can actually implement a dog tag for life, the life of the dog. Maybe this is increasing the walk-ins to the libraries, makes their numbers look good, but you know, maybe there's a different way of doing it if other municipalities are doing it that way.
I would agree,
Because
and we would
it
get
is-
more dogs.
It is an issue where you have to drive in and get your dog tagged. So if there's another alternative, that'd be great to explore.
Mr. Barrett, would you be amenable to receiving direction to, at some point, bring a report back on how, maybe if we could look at
I'd
doing
be
tag-
pleased to help Mrs. Dusling and her team put
that's
together that
you're-
program.
okay,
Sorry, she was busy looking up information. I just wanted you to be informed with a bit of the past history. So I'm sure you're up for it. Okay.
To Mayor Chop, to Councillor Van Passen. So we've looked up very quickly some of the meeting expenses in DCS, and most of those are related to the tourism and economic development area and go towards such things as our destination marketing, or travel writers, room rentals, the ag tour, lunch and learns, those types of things.
Could I pass the chair to Councilor Martin? I'd just like to make a motion right now that for these action items that are brought forward, even through direction to staff, that the clerk's office be directed to compile an action item list.
Through you, that creates a problem because then every direction that you give holds the weight of motion. So there's a difference between a council resolution that is approved by motion of you and when staff informally accept direction. And so what will happen is when staff informally take the direction, they'll go back to SLT and they will assign it and they'll put it in their individual work plans and they will do it. I can record it without a motion that council requested staff to do that if that's the desire. But if you're motioning to do that, then everything that's said here carries the weight of law. And there's no ability to, like, we aren't voting on these things, so it would be impossible to determine what staff need to do and is just being requested. So it'll go into the minutes, I can put it in there, but it just won't have a mover and seconder.
Mayor Chop.
So I'm not even requesting that it go into the minutes, just simply an action item list that's for this council, that's an Excel spreadsheet. Item that would go on there would be dog tags, so that when we look back in 6 months, we can say, oh yeah, we had that discussion on dog tags. Can we see that report? And we've come to see that a lot of things, reports that we've asked for, haven't been via motion, they've been by an ask. And so we need a way to be able to track that. And so if the clerk's department can't do that, maybe it's a situation where Jill or Maureen come in, but somebody needs to be able to take on kind of that secretarial component. And to me, it makes sense that it would be the clerk's department and separate from the minutes, just a simple chart for council to be able to say, just dog tags, that's it. And it would jog our memory that it was dog tags.
That has always been a component of SLT. They always do a follow-up, and Jill can speak to that. They always do a follow-up after every meeting where they go through and they create their own list for senior management on all the informal directions that staff take and that they're going to come back. So there is a document that exists that Jill prepares every week for SLT. And that might have stopped when Mr. Cribbs left. I'm not sure if the SLT members have been continuing on with that process, but that's always been the process. Just to make a distinction between what my office does, which is the formal resolutions and the informal direction that senior management take from council.
So just so I'm clear, so you're saying then, as the clerk, you would be unable to compile a second informal list of resolutions for council to be able to use? The clerk's department is unable to do that by law?
I'm saying I can't, the challenge is for my office is to uphold what council passes in resolution. Those are the important things. So I have to tell staff, this is what you're required to do. And the other list, which is informal direction to the senior management team, isn't something that I can say to staff they're required to bring a report back. If Pam Duesling is saying that she will do a report on dog tag licenses, there is nothing, if that report doesn't come forward, council's option is to come forward and pass a formal resolution directing for that report to come forward. And if we don't have that system, then like if my office is administering both lists, then there's no distinction between what senior management is directing and what my office is directing, essentially. That's the problem.
Okay, so I'm not asking you to enforce the list. I'm just asking for a list in an Excel file to be created that could be shared amongst the counselors, just that we know that if in 6 months we haven't heard from Ms. Duesling, I'm sure we will, I have no doubt, but I'm just saying if something is lost in the way, that when we look back at it in a year from now or 2 years from now, that we can say, oh yeah, hey, we were going to look at dog tags.
Sure.
And
Yep.
have a way to remember that. So that we don't need you to enforce it. We don't need you to communicate with Jill to ensure that it's brought to council. That will be up to senior leadership to bring it on their time. But just so that we have a list that we know that these are all the things that because we've been asking for a lot so far,
Sure.
and
Yep.
I forget which
No,
ones we've asked for.
And there is a list, and perhaps I could just work with Jill to make sure that every week after SLT, she takes the list and emails it around, because one of the things with that list that they do at SLT is they assign who's going to be doing the work on it and kind of a rough date of when that's going to come back. And so if you have me do that list, then you aren't going to get a list that is built in with, this is coming back in February. So
I don't need the
Jill-
list of when it's coming back at what time,
Jill,
just a
though,
list.
through her work at SLT, can produce that list. It already actually exists. It's the SLT follow-up list. It is in place. It just hasn't been circulated to council.
Okay, so just so we're clear one more time, if it's okay, is there something prohibiting by law from you creating a simple list on an Excel spreadsheet that just said dog tags from this meeting, so that I have a way and council has a way of just remembering that it was there in case it's lost in the shuffle with Jill or between meetings or so on, so that we have our own list? Because so far in my review of things that have happened under previous council, as an example, the sale of the properties on Hastings Drive, it was a motion that was passed at council to declare those as surplus assets. And it is not on the action item list, and it just disappeared into the mix. And so I just don't want to see that even after our term is over, that these items disappear. I get that they aren't going to be enforceable by law, but it's just direction.
Of course, if that's council's desire, we will do whatever council desires.
Okay, looking for a seconder. Mayor Chop's motion. Councillor Michele, any discussion? Ryan? Councillor Taylor, sorry.
If this list already exists, do we need a separate one though? There's not going to be any new information housed on it. I'm just.
I believe it's the same motion, or same list just being circulated to us. We're not receiving it at this point in time, and
Yeah, this is the motion to create a new list. Why can't we get the list that's already made circulated?
Mayor Chop.
The list is being compiled after the fact, after the meeting. Things get forgotten after the meeting. All I'm asking for is an informal version of, not minutes, just an informal little list that I could write dog tags, but we all know how I am with papers, and sometimes I lose my paper, and so I lose the list. It's just something simple, just dog tags. I don't need a date, I don't need a staff member nothing, just a way to kind of loosely keep track of the things that we're talking about.
Any further discussion? And those in favor? That's carried.
Okay, I'll take the chair back. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Martin. Okay. There is another, internal training expenses versus the training file. How does that one differ, just out of curiosity? Oh, sorry, 5522, page 4-6. Not a huge item, I just was,
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm going to let Mr. Slichenkov answer that. I believe that's his area.
To you, Madam Mayor. So those are the types of training that we do internally within our human resources department. So we've got a couple of human beings that train our own internal staff instead of contracting out those provisions. Usually that pertains to either mental health training or some occupational health and safety stuff that we would do ourselves.
okay, thanks. Councillor Columbus?
Yes, going back to 4.4, 4-4, 4501 mileage. Mr. Johnson, is that the amount that we took out already, the 14,900, or is that in addition to the amount that we've reduced it by? $4501.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Columbus. So that the 2019 proposed budget number that's on that page does not include the cut that we made, the $20,000 cut that we made today. So this is the original proposed budget amount.
Okay. So that stays in?
So that the revised number would be 459,300.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further, Councillor Columbus? Okay. One of the big ones that's a huge item here, now it has decreased, which is excellent, but the contracted services, what all is included within that bucket on 4-6? It's 5,500. It's almost a $10 million item. I'm assuming that's like some of the recycling, like all of that stuff goes in there?
That's correct. It's all the general services like the Ride Norfolk contracted service for the bus. It includes any services that we have. It would be cleaning services, janitorial services, that kind of thing. So
the only reason I bring this up is one of the big things through the campaign, and everybody, well, for the most part that's here, spoke about this as well, is how Norfolk County has a tendency to overuse consultants when we have a lot of engineers that are in-house and so on. And the one thing that we haven't talked about at all through all the conversations up to date, really, and through the budget conversations, is that number itself. Now, I know some of that is baked into the capital budgets, using outside design and engineering firms and so on. But given that this was, the public are pretty fierce about this issue as well. I received an email from a staff member that was an engineer here for I think 20-some years in the old county as well, and he said that a few years ago things had really changed and that a great deal of the work actually used to be done in-house. Is there a way, Mr. Baird, how do we start moving towards accomplishing this and bringing that work back in-house and not relying on outside consultants to the degree that we are within Public Works, within the planning department, and so on?
Okay, that's a great question, Mayor Chop. We have two PNGs on staff in the county. One is the director for the engineering department, one is a project manager. Both are highly capable individuals. When you look at the capital budget, the water and sewer projects, the wastewater plants, water plants, all the road infrastructure and bridge work, we simply can't do it with the people we have. So we have to rely on outside contractors. And I would suggest that 20 years ago, or certainly pre-Norfolk County, consulting engineers have always been part of the mix, but because our programs have become more aggressive, more costly, more complex, we have no choice but to go to the private sector to help fill that void. And I would agree, we spend a tremendous amount of money. In Brant County, as an example, a business case was put forward recently to look at hiring some additional engineers and technologists that could do some design work, and it was directly offset through the costs that are paid to consulting engineers. But again, it's not to take business away from either or build an empire of staff. We do have to rely on, in some cases, their third-party expertise.
Do we stamp any of our own documents?
Pardon me?
Does our either of our PNGs, do they stamp any of our own documents, or is all the stamping done out of house?
The stamping is generally done by consultants. We just simply can't act as a PNG, a design PNG, in-house. That's been the case certainly since 2001, when I was first working with Norfolk County. The second previous general manager, he was a professional engineer, and there was no way you can be an operating general manager and then also be stamping documents. He fulfilled certain roles as a professional engineer, as does our staff, but we just don't have the time to be able to design work and do that, especially when you look at the complex, the water sewer systems. It's highly complex. But again, the engineering group, we have currently 2 project managers and 4 technologists, and we have an $80 million annual capital budget. So it's, that's why things are getting drawn out, and that's why we rely on consulting engineers to augment what we're able to do. But there is an opportunity. I think the pendulum has perhaps swung over the last few years far to one side, and maybe there's an opportunity. Again, I know you have a very business focus, as do the other council members, to maybe look at a different model. We still want to keep up with the work, and we heard today, we need to stay on top of things, so we're ready to accept new development and continue to grow the community. But there's only so much that those people can do when you see the workload and the time constraints that they have to work with.
I think that there's sometimes, though, there's small documents or small designs that could be stamped by an engineer in-house, and there are some opportunities there where I don't think that there should be a policy or an unwritten policy within Norfolk that our own engineers won't sign off on a particular project.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest they are. They're not backing away from that. It's just, again, their role is let the consultants design the work, provide the stamp, provide that verification that everything is appropriate to that engineering standard, and we accept that and we move forward and construct.
I think that's something that, as council, we really need to look at as changing that direction a little bit.
We could look at other municipalities and look at their models, how they do that. Sometimes that's the best way to learn from one another, and I see that as an opportunity. And it's not necessarily to save money, but to work more efficiently. And at the end of the day, we got to get these projects done. We can't have bridges closed for years, and water plants take multiple years to get finished. We need to stay on top of that. And you need people with good project management to do
Major
that.
projects like that, I definitely agree. When we're looking at some smaller issues around the county, though, I think that we probably do have some of that expertise in-house that would be able to handle it in-house without having to farm out every single project for a consultant and an outside engineer to stamp off on it. I think that we've developed this over fear, and this is from another very respected member in the community that I spoke with, and you know, they said, well, what do you think one of the challenges there? They'd asked me, and I said, well, you know, there is this issue, this fear of liability, and you know, we've seen it in the tender process from the Consulting Engineers of Ontario, where there was even a recommendation not to bid on an RFP here. I think there's this fear that, you know, our PNG, if he was to stamp off on something that, you know, maybe he would be, and you just mentioned that, liable or so on, but we have indemnification bylaws. We have the protection within Norfolk County to be able to, just in the same way if he was working for any other engineering firm and he stamped off on a document, you know, he's upheld to his professional credentials and so on, and provided he abides by those, you know, he's absolved of that liability, or he's indemnified through Norfolk County. So I think it's something we need to start looking towards if we're really going to make fundamental change here and fundamental reductions in costs as we continue to move forward. Any further items? Okay, so we have a couple of the, what percent, where are we sitting around right now?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we are sitting at a median household increase of 2.2%, or $58.34 a month, or a year, sorry, that would be drastic, or $4.86 a month.
Okay, so we've got a couple boards to deal with as well, correct?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, we spoke earlier, and I believe you asked for some history on just percentage increases with the library board and the police services board. So I'll start with the police services board. There's actually a decrease from 15 to 16 of 4.7%. There was a bit of a reform on the OPP contracts across the province that year. Then in 17, that went up by 2.5%. In 18, it went up by 1.1%, and then this year it's a 3.2% increase. For the library, where did I put the library?
James, sorry, can I stop you just before
Yes.
I lose everybody? Just to come back to one other little thing here, I just saw my other star. Municipal drain assessments, that's on 4-6, 5524. They went up 75% this year.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, that was one of the cuts on the list. So of the municipal drains, there's 1,200 of them in Norfolk County. Pretty much every one of them has some Norfolk land on it. So if there's a municipal drain maintenance that's needed or new construction, then the county is responsible for those costs. So that's what that represents.
My apologies, sorry, the cut was off that number. Gotcha, my bad.
So for the library, from 15 to 16, there was a 4% increase. 16 to 17, 3%, and then another 3% from 17 to 18, and it jumped back up to 4% for 2019.
Councillor Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Chop. I thought when we heard from Ms. Heather King from the library board that Mayor Chop actually asked and clarified that she was actually asking for less money in the budget this year. Do you recall that? We talked about.
There was something, but it was how did that?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
If I may, that could have been capital requirements.
Might have been there. Yeah, that's right. Are they going to come up in a little bit, or?
They would be able to be here in an hour
Okay.
as they're driving, if you want me to contact them now to come speak to the budget.
So one of the things I've discussed with Ms. King was the library board also had the same sort of policy within their training budget as far as university courses being covered if people applied under the budget. it's difficult because Norfolk County, obviously, the library board is separate, so basically they put their requested amount of funds forward, and then how they choose to use them is their discretion. So when you look at the amount that they've been asking for, if you make a reduction of 1%, or whatever that might look like, that means that they have the freedom then to go and make those reductions wherever they so choose. It's not that we're dictating it's from here or it's from there. But the idea would be that we start to work to consistent policies being applied between the library and Norfolk County. We also talked about there were some concerns over the snow days that the libraries were closed and Norfolk County was not closed. And sort of the messaging was, the library cares about their employees and Norfolk County, I guess by virtue, does not. But I don't think that that's all the case. I think that if anybody in bad weather on those days should be, stay home. And you have days in lieu or so on. Nobody should feel that they have to drive into work on any of those days. So I think that it's important that we start to try to move towards consistent messaging between the library and the county, despite the fact that we are separate organizations, or one is a corporation, one is a board. So, for that, when we look at applying a reduction there again, it would be, I think, with partly the understanding that these are the areas that, well, it's discretionary to you. We would hope that they would sort of respect and follow along. So, Councillor Huffman.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you. That's a rhetorical question. The library advertises in the Norfolk activities guide, correct? Yes? Yeah. They pay for that? Out of their own? Okay, all right. And do we have many interdepartmental charges with the library? You don't have to answer, Bill. Nick, you can just keep answering behind you.
Well, Councillor Huffman, Mr. Suchenkov is all over the library board knowledge.
So through you, Madam Mayor, I can speak to the interdepartmental charges that I'm familiar, and then James can certainly fill in any other interdepartmentals. So we do have quite a few human resources interdepartmental charges that the library gets charged for. Now, the extent to which these services are used or are accessed are and have historically been to the discretion of the library, and so they pay for it and they're able to access should they reach out to us. Historically, that has not been necessarily the case, depending on what the items are, and because they're a separate entity, they don't necessarily have to take our advice or direction as to items pertaining those specific areas.
Just as a follow-up, so some of this is new information to me, and some is I had an idea. I would expect that the general taxpayer probably doesn't understand the difference between Norfolk County as the corporation and the library. So just seems to me to be a lot of confusion because it's branded the same, right? Like their logos, everything's the same. So who does the hiring for the library?
The library does that independently of us and does that amongst their own staff complement and the individuals that they're having do that type of work. They're not accessing Norfolk County's Human Resources Department for those services.
If I can just follow along with your thinking here. I mean, maybe it's kind of time to get some of this stuff out in the open as some challenges that exist between the library board and the county. I mean, it just as we're at budget time, would it be worth sort of mentioning the IT position as an example? I just think that Counselor Hoffman's right, and that's why I was kind of talking about it a little bit. I'm trying to be a little bit careful with what I say, but at the same time, I mean, we've all campaigned on accountability, and taxpayers do deserve to know kind of the background with this and how it all works together. And I've certainly learned a lot since just being in this role with how that operates.
So through you, Madam Mayor, and to build on my previous response to Councillor Huffman, is in addition to the Human Resources Services, we also have an in-house IT department. The IT department in general provides services to the entire corporation, as well as historically to the library. And then I guess in some respects what's different in this year as opposed to some of the historical stuff is in the last year's budget, council approved a technical / social media position that exists within the library to do technical social media / stuff for the library independent of the IT department for the county, and we do not have access to that individual to sort of meet the corporation's needs.
Go once. Can I go one step further? I think there's some pay differences even that exist between Norfolk County employees and library employees. And I think that's a challenge. I think that everybody should be on the same sort of basis. We do have that ability to share interdepartmental services. And so if one employee wasn't being used, full-time as in the IT employee, the IT department here put forward a request for an additional employee, and I think it was myself that had made the motion, not to support the hiring of that position. However, is it something as we grow in technology that certainly I can see a need for? I think it's unfortunate that when we should have that ability to share between, and we share services with the library board, that when they go and they have their own IT person, we don't have the ability to use them when they're maybe not working over there. But it's a difficult issue to resolve because the library board is a separate entity in a sense. The only control we have over that is how we set their budget number, and then from there, they have to go and make their own changes.
So again, just to follow up on where you're going with that, and then my question is going back to where what Councillor Van Passen was saying earlier in regards to why would we be in the business of some things that could be duplicate services? This is a tad obviously different, but is it a mandate of the corporation of Norfolk County that we provide library services? Like I just want to get that lay of the land as to how it all became the way that it did.
Separate. Part of it's legislated. I'll let Mr. Suchenko take it over. There are different approaches being used in different municipalities that I've been kind of doing some research on and so on, and how it works in other places, but he knows a lot more than I do on this.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Huffman. So I'm not, and this is a technical term, super duper familiar with the with the Libraries Act, and one would have to go back to that, and I would certainly seek our solicitor's help in that. However, there's different models in how that could be done in municipalities. One may or may not have a library board altogether. There are some municipalities that have significantly closer hierarchical relationship in the sense that for the purposes of the Libraries Act stuff, the library board does that type of work, but for the purposes of administrative decisions and control, that the head of the library reports through to the CAO of the corporation that runs the totality of the municipal services. So if one has a CAO, it's not out of the question to have for administrative services the library CEO report for that, and then to report on the Libraries Act type of stuff to the library board, and then obviously the option to, if one appeals to the ministry to remove the library board altogether. But once again, that's something that the solicitor would be much more of an expert in that regard.
I did notify them, so I don't know if they're, the board members, we have some library staff, I believe, here in attendance, but there were board members, as Heather King's away right now, there were board members who were going to come forward and speak to council if there was any questions. They're still going to take some time to arrive here.
Oh, sorry. When we go through the police services board, following the police services board meeting, we would then, at council, discuss the following council meeting, discuss the police services board budget and approve it at that point in time in case we wanted to make some adjustments to it then. So if it's possible today, we will approve, once we get through the budgets, we would approve everything with the exception of the police services board budget.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I could make a suggestion, Kathy, feel free to tell me your opinion as well. When we have these timing issues, what we typically do is a budget amendment report after the budget's been passed. This way, we can make sure, like Sue has the right amount to tax the property owners and so on and so forth. And that would be our suggestion. So if there is an adjustment to the budget, we would have to find a way to fund it partway through the year.
Could you take me through those numbers again for the last few years and what they were asking?
So 2015 to 2016, there was a reduction of 4.7% or 583,000. And then it increased by 2.5% or 300,000, I'm rounding. And then it increased again to 2018 by 1.1% or 391,000. And then now we have sorry, there's not 391,000 is the increase to 2019, and that's 3.2%.
So we were 4.7 down to 2.5 down to 1.1, and now they're requesting 3.2?
Yes, and the 4.7 was a reduction, not an increase.
The 4.7 was an initial reduction that year?
Correct.
Okay. It seems like a big jump this year, all of a sudden, with a potential reduction in services of being offered to the county. I guess maybe if it's possible, could I pass the chair to Deputy Martin? And for the purpose of provisionally approving the police services budget with the potential for an amendment, that maybe we look at maintaining it at last year's increase of the 1.1%?
So my concern with that is, I'm not sure if Mr. Loeb is in the building. I believe he was looking at this file, or I'm not sure. I mean, this is a contract. I'm not sure if we can amend the contract at this point. Maybe Andy, you have something you can.
So through you, Madam Mayor, to council, the effect of not approving it just impacts our own police services board. It doesn't affect the provision of police services in the municipality because of the agreement. So what you would be doing if you don't approve their budget is you'd be stopping things like the community policing organizations, or there's another program, I forget what the name of it is to help to find people who are lost or wandering. So you would impact directly those. Those are the only real matters because of the police servicing agreement that are actually before council. So it isn't the totality of policing service which is determined by the agreement with the province.
Mayor Chop.
So just in these years past, maybe this question more for Councillor Columbus then. Just because we talked, so is that how it worked in the past? Was it was always an approval of whatever the police services board put forward?
Generally, that's the way it's been. And
Oh, okay.
We haven't seen a 3.2 for a long time. Right?
Go ahead. Yep.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So through you to council, yes, there's a contract in place pursuant to Section 10 of the Police Services Act, and with that, there's a formula for how the costing works for the OPP contracted policing. My understanding is that the increase that's in the budget, although this isn't my area, but I presume the increase in the budget arises directly from that formula, and therefore it ought to be paid pursuant to the contract. There are contract provisions should the county take issue with the amount that can be explored, and that would be the more appropriate way to deal with any issues with the amount. Would be my advice. I can provide further advice in closed as to why that would be the more appropriate way, but that would be my suggestion.
Mayor Chop?
My apologies, I just was kind of, just by our conversation earlier, that was my suggestion. I thought that's kind of the direction we were going, and so I misunderstood how it was done in the past, or I guess at this point, maybe it would be prudent to, we'll approve it then as is, and if we need to exercise some other provision in the contract to try to adjust the rate after the fact if we need to.
So my suggestion is, as Madam Mayor stated, is to go as is. If we establish any savings as a result of looking at the contract, I suggest having that put towards our contingency reserve. And I think that would be my recommendation, because our contingency reserve is in a low state, and I think that would be a great spot for it.
Mayor Chop?
I'll withdraw my motion. Okay, so Police Services Board, Library Board is to come, and that's it? The speed signs in that calculation with the 2.2, that was removed? It wasn't there anyways, okay. Councillor Martin?
I do have 3 issues. They're not specific to a line item, but they do all relate to the budget that I was hoping we can discuss, whether we're passing a formal motion or just maybe adding it to the parking lot list that Kathy and James showed earlier. So I will take direction from the clerk as to whether or not we should formalize this through a motion, but something Councillor Michelli had referenced earlier in the day was you gave him the option of dealing with the issue of waste management today or having an overhaul and a review of the system, and he had mentioned both. When we revisited that, we didn't go into it. So I'm assuming that a motion would be best, and I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to lay that on the floor now, that a waste management review, including details on green disposal and organic compost options, be put into a report and brought back to council before the next budget.
Anyone? Did I miss something?
A motion Andy's just typing up about
Okay,
review on waste management, including organic compost
I
and
didn't hear
green
the motion
disposal
part of the meeting. I
options.
thought it was a question directed to somebody. Sorry, my apologies. I'm fading.
I have the motion as you read it.
Okay, seconder, Councillor Michelli, and any further discussion?
Building on yesterday and today's comments about potentially looking at the entire system for savings. I thought something that happened on the campaign trail in Port Dover was a lot of compost options, green bin options, so I thought that that could be wrapped into one. Just brought back an in-house report done by Mr. Baird and his team, which we've already discussed, and I would look forward to that. Nothing pressing, but certainly before we sit back down for budget again.
All those in favor? It's carried unanimously. Councilor Martin.
Thank you. I do have two additional comments. I thought that maybe we would hear some reporting on the legacy fund during the budget, and I know we haven't really had a whole lot of time to do that, but I wondered if you could provide details to me as to the frequency of the reporting that comes to council on that fund before I lay a motion out.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Martin. That's a good question. I am currently working on a biannual report, which means twice a year, not every 2 years, on the performance of the Legacy Fund, as well as the other investment instruments that we have for Norfolk County. We have a pretty good short-term investment policy as well that I want to incorporate in that report.
Thank you. My thoughts are, and speaking to a lot of people, again, while campaigning, that if anyone had a sizable investment, they would have a lot of regular details provided to them on the returns. And I wondered if the rest of council had interest on just a simple report being updated through email or through our agenda, maybe quarterly, just provided to council, and then we would still rely on your biannual report. If that was something that interests council, I would be interested in formalizing that in a motion.
Councilor Hoffman.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to Councillor Martin. If I'm not mistaken, I was here at that meeting with the legacy, and I think it was tied into something. I think you might have been here as well. But I thought that there was something put in place that was more frequent than the twice a year. Or was it just that there was nothing before and and twice a year seemed like a lot?
Well, how far back do we want to go? Through you, Madam Mayor, we used to have a subcommittee that met, I believe, every other month, and there was the mayor, 2 councillors, the treasurer, the CAO, and a representative from one fund. And that subcommittee got disbanded, and then we came up with the biannual report to council. There might have been some miscommunication between that subcommittee being disbanded and today. Okay. However, we do receive monthly reports from one fund on the performance of those investments. And if council wishes, I can take those statements and put them in an email to council and have that available.
Councilor Martin, then Councilor Van Passen. Unless, sorry, Councilor Hoffman, if you have more questions.
Thank you, Mayor Chop, and thank you, James. I would like to, also one final thought, that maybe when this review committee goes around, that committee specifically relating to the Legacy Fund be revisited sooner rather than later. I think that's the largest, fund that Norfolk County has, and it deserves a lot of attention. I would like to move a motion then that the monthly report from one fund be shared with council members, and that we will just wait for the next biannual report to come from you, and then maybe provide different direction at that time, but that definitely be shared with us, and maybe additionally shared with the public.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure if we want to make it as maybe perhaps as part of our information package. That might be a good solution. I do want to I don't want to give a lot of background, but this type of investment, it's not just a straight 2% a month or what have you. There's a lot of trading going on, and when we switched our asset mix to more of an equity balance, every month we were gaining a little bit. There was a couple they called it corrections in the market that happened in 2018, where there was some volatile months. However, in January of this year was our best month in the last 3 years. So I just even though you'll be getting, and I might do a yearly summary as well, I'm sort of thinking about that out loud. However, just for council to be cautious, if there's a really bad month, usually there's months that make up for it going forward, because it's not like a GIC or things like that. There's a lot of trading going on with this kind of investment.
I think it would be interesting to see this committee reformed again, and I think there's also some really strong members in the public here that have extensive background, and I'd like to see some members of the public actually be on the committee as well. Councillor Van Passen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Unless our financial experts are doing a much better job than they have the last year, I'd only like to see it once a year, because I can only take that kind of bad news once. And maybe we should look at our consultant expert financial wizards, and maybe we got to look at a different way how we invest that money, because I've not seen yet any great returns that you couldn't have just got by walking down to the bank and plunking it down and buying GICs. And what did we pay, $450,000 fee to our experts last year to make a $215,000 return?
$313,000.
Doesn't sound all that good to me. So.
Councillor Rabbits? Your seconder?
I'd like to
Okay.
second Councillor Martin's motion.
Can we get that motion read again?
Yes, that the monthly reporting from the one fund respecting the legacy fund be shared with council.
Okay, all those in favor? Would we like to do anything further about the committee?
My thought was,
Or think about it and bring it back to council maybe when we ratify the budget?
If I could make a suggestion, in the report that I'm going to be bringing back to council, I'm going to bring representatives from one fund, and hopefully it'll also be a little bit of an education session on exactly how those funds work. And then at that point, perhaps we can make that decision. Either way, I'm good. I've lived both, and both have their advantages and disadvantages.
Councillor Martin?
if I may, if we could have some advance notice on that date, I would love to be able to share with people who specifically spoke about this fund on my campaign to tune in on that day and be able to hear from one fund themselves.
While we have a minute about advance notice, I know it's, I'm just wondering what the feeling would be in terms of us preparing the agendas an additional week in advance so that notice was, you're not receiving a binder this big on Friday for Tuesday where the agendas would be set earlier and therefore it would go out to the public a week earlier as well. And if people wish to come to the meetings, they would have more notice of it. I'm myself, I find the timeline incredibly difficult to, although I make it happen, to come prepared for council meetings when it's this big and you've only got a couple days. Sometimes people have things that come up in a couple days. And it was interesting because Councillor Van Passen forwarded me an email from a councillor in a neighboring county that was, she wondered how we did it here in Norfolk, and that was actually one of her concerns was the fact, she said, I just don't know how to get through this agenda in a couple days and show up and be prepared. So I'm wondering if that would work, how we've talked a little bit about it, how you might be able to structure that so that we could do it a week ahead of time.
Sure. I guess the process is really just making sure that senior leadership team has enough notice of the new timeline, specifically finance, because they do a great amount of the review, and usually the review process takes 3 weeks. So now that we're heading into March break, it isn't necessarily a bad time, but it would just send staff scrambling for the March. Some things might get deferred from March 19th if we start, but I wouldn't ever suggest making a change like that before a break period, and we frankly do have a break period just coming up. So if there is definitely options to do it. It could cause some confusion, because if we're going to give you the agenda an entire week in advance, it might be easier just for us to give you the agenda when you show up on Tuesday for the next week's meeting, so that you could walk away. It might save us some courier cost in that regard. So that could be kind of an in-between one, is that we prepare it on Mondays rather than the Fridays and give it to you when you show up here on the Tuesdays.
Okay.
If that is enough notice. If you need the Friday, if you need a week and a full week and a half kind of to review it, then that's an option that we can do too.
We could think about this and talk about it on at council next week. And I just thought it would be a good time going into the break. And if we even said sometime in April of setting a date, so there's something to, not of doing it next week or anything like that, but having the break in there splits it up a little bit and we can, thoughts, concerns? Yeah, okay. So we'll talk about it at council then, and Councillor Huffman?
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Do we need to worry about talking about it at council next week, or can we do something today about that so we can move forward? I mean, everyone around here, I don't think is objecting to it.
Okay.
If it's doable through the clerk's office, seems to make more sense, and it just seems like a best practice, and I think it involves the public, obviously, a lot more, because by the time they try and get things in, and we saw those last-minute things, and you get those emails, and again, you're getting it on a Friday, right before the weekend, so that it is tough, and people want to be as prepared as possible.
So the only other piece that I was maybe going to, and this is what I was thinking about deferring it, just so I could articulate my thoughts a little better, but in terms of the public that wishes to do deputations, I was thinking that we could still leave that as the day. I mean, if they were added as, you know, as an example, we had the last minute deputation that was added for the cab company yesterday. It was on a separate sheet of papers, and that way the public has time to see it, and then they have time to respond and say, hey, I want to make a deputation on this item. So their deadline would still be the Thursday before, but it would be provided to us at the council.
Yeah,
Is that
so
possible?
for deputations, the procedural bylaw reads for council and committee, you need to have the application into us by, I think it's 4 p.m. the day prior. So you can come in on a Monday and get on for a deputation still, and you would still be able to. And for council, it's the noon on the Thursday prior.
On the noon.
Yeah.
So we would leave that as is. They would just be added after the fact. That gives the council, or public time as well to get the agenda, digest it, and if they want to come and talk about it, great. So do we want the Friday, or do we want just delivered at the council meeting? At the council meeting? Okay, so that would be the date. We could pick a date in April then to give you time to make that adjustment.
Sure, I think planning staff and other staff would likely anticipate that they'd like to have till at least April to get it sorted. So we could just say the first agendas for April will be slated on that schedule.
Okay. And would you like a motion or just direction?
If Mr. Cridlin could nod his head, then I think we'd be okay.
Okay. Councillor Hoffman.
Bizarrely enough, if we have, because there was some discussion, I think, over on the other side about whether the or the Tuesday or the Friday, did some people have a preference?
We were just concerned about the courier, him or herself, and their position, and I
was a
believe
little
that these individuals would still have courier services for Norfolk County, and they would not
Okay,
be
it doesn't make an impact
without
or anything?
a job.
No, it doesn't make it. They do all our inter-office work, so if there is a deficiency in one area, we'll work with them, and it'll quickly get swallowed up by another area that needs some more service.
Okay, perfect.
I think he's been doing it for like 20 years or something crazy. I know. Yeah, no, that was when I said the Friday or the Tuesday, the same thought I had. We could always, do you want to move it to the Friday?
I think it'd be great for in council to get it while we sit here. I don't think
Okay.
it needs to be delivered to us on another date. I think
Perfect.
Tuesdays are good. No.
Sounds good. Okay, we have a plan for April. Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. This is my third and final comment. again, not a budget line per se, but as it does relate to the budget, a lot of comments and concerns have come in with regards to snow removal pertaining to sidewalks in Port Dover. I'm sure this is in every community. I had a conversation with Mr. Baird, and he informed me that his department would be able to work on a report to bring some creative solutions to us, and maybe some comparables from other municipalities. I don't recall if you mentioned that or not, about snow removal on sidewalks for residents. This clearly isn't an overnight fix, but again, if before budget next year, Public Works would be able to bring a report to us discussing that, that would be my preference.
Right, can I have a mover and a seconder that we recess the budget meeting at 3:05 to reconvene the Board of Health deliberations?
I have one item I'd like to discuss to find out where it's at, if I could.
No problem.
And it's our reserves. We were talking about them being depleted. Where are we with putting dollars into our reserves with respect to this budget, James?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Columbus. So with this budget, the good news about this budget is we have, I believe we started in January with about $1.3 million in increased reserve contributions, and we made a couple adjustments to it today, so that's now down to approximately $1,050,000 that we're increasing our reserve contributions with, and that is definitely a step in the right direction for the financial sustainability for Norfolk County.
Okay, so mover and a seconder. Councilor Rabbits, Councilor Taylor, 3:05. Council recess this budget meeting to reconvene the Board of Health budget deliberations. All in favor? Carried. Okay, and I guess I will turn it over to Marlene.
Thank you, Board Chair Chop. I was just wondering if maybe we could ask the questions, and I'll try to answer them, and if I'm unable to, I'll either reach out to staff or I'll have staff head over if that's required.
So over the past, I guess my question would be over the past month, while kind of the other departments have gone through and looked at some reductions, is there anything within the Board of Health's budget that, and we talked about essential programs and things.
So thank you.
Or non-essential
Board
programs,
Chair
rather.
Chop. So we have, like all of the other departments, we did look at our budget as well. You'll see from the adjustments that were previously presented, we did remove the IDEAS program from the discussion that was had back in January that was $10,800 with a levy offset. of 6,400. We have gone through and reviewed some of the programs. The programs would potentially require service reductions. So if that is the board's desire, then we would be prepared to bring a report forward with recommendations for potential service reductions and ask the board to direct staff to make those reductions.
Any further questions? No. Counselor Geisens, you're looking at that intently. Any questions? Okay. Do we have a number for here? Do you have a number for me for the motion?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it might take about 4 or 5 minutes to put this number together. If there's anything else in the meantime, or if maybe we can take a quick
Maybe just a
recess.
washroom break for everybody? Okay, so we'll reconvene here. I've got a motion before me now that we've got the figure, that the Board of Health approve the Haldeman Norfolk Health Unit operating budget with Haldeman Norfolk combined net levy requirement of $2,772,400. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Huffman, Councillor Taylor, seconded. Any further discussion? Councillor Van Passen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought at the last meeting that I was looking forward to a report on all the different programs, which ones are mandated and which ones are discretionary, and I assume that's still coming at some point in time?
Through the board chair, we can definitely provide a report in the next couple of months of all the different programs on what's mandatory and what's not. We can pull that definitely together.
If you would be able to give me a couple weeks heads up of when that will be coming, just so that I can invite the Mayor of Haldeman to see if he would like to join us for that meeting.
Through the to the board chair, absolutely. It will probably have to now be into May, our circulation for the April reports, because the Health and Social Services has to go through the advisory. There is about a 2-month window, but we'll move forward to having that for the May Board of Health.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, next motion, I need a mover and a seconder that bylaw 19-02-BH being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of this Board of Health meeting held on January 23rd, 24th, and February 20th, 2019 be passed, signed by the chair and clerk, and affixed with the corporate seal. A mover and a seconder, Councillor Columbus, seconded by Councillor Taylor, or Rabbits. I don't know why that's the first time I did that today. All those in favor? Carried. Next one is that the Board of Health adjourn this meeting at 3:29 p.m. A mover and a seconder. Councillor Rabbits, Councillor Geisens. All those in favor? All right, so we will reconvene our levy supported operating budget meeting. And I believe the library board members are all here now? Or the... Oh, we see. Okay. Any other budget items other than in regards to the information that we have? Anyone else? We never did do a reduction on the meeting meals. We didn't. We never did do a reduction on the 30% increase with the meeting meals. Somehow that we started talking about it, and we talked about the potential for a reduction there. And then it never happened. Kathy, right? Do you remember the line item there with that? $41.81. So in 2016, they decreased it by 10%. It was 89,500. They put it up 10% in 2017 to 98,500. 2018 got approved at 120. That was a 22% increase. And this year, again, we're looking at a 27.2% increase to 153. Somebody like to put a motion on the floor in that regards, or I could pass the Councillor Van Passen. It's line item 4181, page 4-4. I think that's fair. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Rabbits, any discussion? All those in favor? Did you get that one? Okay, thanks. Almost stuck by me, that one. Okay. Okay, if the library board would like to come forward. Thanks, Tom.
me just catch my breath. You got me running today, Madam Mayor.
I'm sorry to drag you here on your day off. Or?
No, I'm in the middle of night shift, so.
Okay.
Oh, quick wake up and I'm here, so no problem at all. Good afternoon, everybody. With me today are, as you see, Casey Whitwell, our administrative coordinator, and Janet Cowan, who is our manager of facilities. From what I understand, you were discussing some of the library issues earlier, is that right? I don't know where you wanted me to leave off or pick up, or do you have any questions, or?
Just earlier was more talking about some highlight. There's, even myself, I didn't know exactly the distinction between the library board coming in, or even how the police services budget's been approved in the past. So it's kind of a learning experience for a lot of us sitting here. So we were talking principally about the fact that you give us a budget number, and then we can change that budget number.
Correct.
However, how you decide to implement it is
Exactly.
your discretion.
Yeah.
So we covered that. There was a little bit of talk about, and what we touched upon at the library board meeting in terms of, although you are a separate entity, of the sort of policy considerations that we have to start to look at between the library and the county. For example, with the training budget that we've spoken about, that, we know it's unfortunate to have to do it, but, when corporations in hard times, that everybody needs to sort of feel. So our hope is that, that same policy will also be implemented at the library board, consistent with kind of the views that this council is taking.
To speak on consistency, well, first of all, to speak as far as the Library Act is concerned, you're correct. We come to you as a separate entity after we go through our finance committee and our board, and we'll come back as we did with this year with a 3.99 increase to our budget. At that point, you folks will say to us, yay or nay, and then we'll take that number back to our board, at which point we will make the cuts that we deem necessary as the board. The Ontario Library Act and the board exist to keep government at a certain distance, and just to maintain the integrity of the whole system. It's worked out very well here, and I think, as you were alluding to, if I heard it right, a lot of our consistency issues have been worked on pretty well over the last number of years. The memorandum of understanding, which the former CAO and the library board we were working on should have been completed, was on timetable to be completed, I think, next month. They can address any issues with consistency and make it even a smoother process. What was your other comment? Was the...
Just the consistency, how the budget was approved. It was more, again, just some of the counselors here, I just learned it through being at the library board, and so other people don't necessarily know that.
Whereas you may get more information and be able to dictate more from staff, or to staff, with the library board, we're at kind of an arm's reach. So we're at your mercy as far as how much you want to give us. But how we want to spend it is entirely up to us, basically, within reason. And that goes with respect on both ends.
So I know you also, I'm sure you've been following along a little bit with the budget deliberations. We've started at 8.6 here as an increase. We're now kind of, we've whittled our way down to 2.2% at this point. So whatever happens now, it's not a reflection of the library board. It's certainly, it's when you're in tough times, everybody's got to sacrifice a little bit, and that's just kind of our perspective.
Certainly, we recognize that. But as long as you folks recognize that, with that possibly comes service cuts on this end. We maintain, 5.5 branches, including the one at Norview. And when we come to you, there's only certain things that we can cut, as you have in your documents. The drivers that we have, our hands are tied. I'm sure we can find certain scenarios and answers to whatever questions you have financially on our end. But every decision is going to have an impact.
There were some additional positions, though, that were being created within that budget, correct? There were some additional hiring of staff?
The hiring of, I think you were talking to the social media position?
No,
Is
no,
that the
no,
one?
no, just within the new budget, with the budget that's been put forward. There
Yeah,
were-
we added some some pages, hours, which help balance out the budget for when we're overstaffed or understaffed. We can certainly look at that. We're not looking at any major additions. There was a 5-hour position in Waterford. Partly that was funded by a position at Lakewood and Port Dover as well. So again, there's not much wiggle room for us. But again, you're free to tell us where you want us to be because it's your checkbook. We can only go from there. But again, service cuts was not, we've got ourselves to a pretty good level and we run a pretty lean machine. You know, with Heather's done a great job and her staff, and we're pretty proud of what we're doing over there. So.
Councillor Huffman, I think, has a question.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to Tom. A couple questions, because this is, I guess I feel really silly for not realizing that you really are your own entity.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's very transparent, I don't think, to the public. I mean, I really don't think. They would assume that anybody who works at the library is a Norfolk County employee.
Which you are, yeah.
So, which isn't really, in fact, accurate. So, I guess one of my questions is, there's two. One is that you said that if there was a reduction to the budget, that there could be service cuts. So is that service cuts as well as staff cuts, or would you maintain your staffing complement, and just look at programming reduction?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it could look at many things.
Okay.
It could be staff. It could be hours. It could be a branch. It could be any programming. A lot of the programming that we offer to the public is volunteer programming, which I know we talked about at our meeting last week was minimum $35,000 savings to the county through volunteers. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've learned with dealing with library people, when I say library people, patrons of the library, they're pretty protective of the service, and they're very territorial. Mm-hmm. They're proud of what they get, you know, for the value of what they have to invest. And Councillor Columbus can certainly attest to that. So, and I just to be clear with you on the transparency, mm-hmm. There's 3 councillors on our board. You know, we can't get any more
I
clear,
understand
we can't get
that.
any more transparent than
I'm
that.
talking about in terms of when you're looking at the general public, there's a lot of things that, you know, are very not clear. I mean, actually campaigning, someone said to me, would you cut library hours? And I said, absolutely, I would never be in support of that. You know, I would want them to be open really way more than they are.
Sure.
Right? I had no idea that I would have no say in that.
You do have a say indirectly.
Yeah.
You can, it's as Mayor Chop alluded to, with our training budget. Mm-hmm. We're fortunate that we have a good relationship with Norfolk Council. If council decides that it's for the county good to dictate policy that says this, that would come back to the library board, for example. The board would say, okay, we may agree with it, we may not agree with it. But at the end of the day, we can only spend as much money as you're going to give us.
And I do know that many of the programs that are provided, they do serve the needs of our more vulnerable citizens, and that I am very appreciative of. The one thing I do wonder sometimes is that if some of the services duplicated in other aspects of the county. But my final question is, so in regards to the staffing piece, I guess trying to understand, and as this is all a new learning curve for me, so with human resources and thing, who does that piece for the library board?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have an agreement with human resources, for example. Mm-hmm. We have a good relationship with IT and with all the other departments. We're looking at different areas now too, through that memorandum of understanding, where services are duplicated. For example, we were being charged for contract negotiations by HR at one point.
Right.
We don't have a union. Okay. So when we look at that, there's an $8,000 savings from what I understand right off the top.
That was an interdepartmental.
So we're looking at all that as well, and that's through the memorandum of understanding.
Okay.
It's
And-
becoming more and more clear.
And the wages of the staff of the library fall within how they work here in the county in terms of with the pay equity or the grids and
The
things
grids
like
and
that?
exactly. And what, again, through you, Madam Mayor, it's up to the library board if county staff get a raise at the end of the year, and it's up to us whether we're going to follow in line with that.
Okay.
And again, for all intents and purposes, they are county employees. They just work for the library. You know, we're at, it's
Okay.
pretty similar.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor
Thank
Hoffman,
you.
maybe we could kind of direct some of your questions to Mr. Suchenkov.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Huffman. So I can certainly confirm, as we discussed previously, that the interdepartmental amounts are being charged to the library budget. However, to the extent that these services are used by the library, as far as the Human Resources Department is concerned, is quite sporadic in that regard. We've certainly reached out to the library and have offered the library to access those services more frequently because we believe there's efficiencies and collaborations to be made. We run a corporation of more than 1,000 people at some of our peaks. So there's certainly benefits that could be availed that historically were not always sort of accessed. And the other piece, specifically the item that the board chair has identified, something like contracted services or employee and labor relations from a human resources perspective can be multiples of things. In a unionized environment, it could be contract negotiation and collective bargaining. In a non-unionized perspective, that could be negotiating contracts with employees as they're coming on. So a lot of that work is done, depending on the position, through our human resources staff and our non-union group as well. So as far as that departmental charge is concerned, the library is very welcome to avail ourselves to the Human Resources Department in supporting those negotiations with these external individuals. However, that's not historically been done. So as far as any cuts to the contracted services item from those interdepartmentals, I want to make that clear to council that that's not just in a unionized setting and collective bargaining, that those could be in different contexts, used in different ways as library wishes to access them.
Thank you for that clarification.
So just to follow up on that, Councillor Hoffman, just because we've had various conversations about it. So the idea as well being that, and as we look at the budget, there is you guys are paying interdepartmental charges, and there is capacity within the HR department to be able to handle that work that rightfully should be going to them, since that interdepartmental charge is there. So the idea, I guess for me, where I struggle a little bit with the addition of more employees to the staff, in some ways it could also simply be a redistribution of the work, where perhaps some of the work that maybe had more of an HR component could be shifted over to the HR department, since you're already paying for it through the interdepartmental charge, and free up then an employee to be able to go and add to the library service component.
Have faith.
I know that's a tough one.
No, it's not. No, have faith in the fact that we're looking at every angle of that, because it's a pretty lean budget when we look at the hours that we're serving. So and that's why the process with the MOE has been such a good one, because what it's unearthed is some of these inefficiencies, both in our end and in the county's end. Like, for instance, our relationship with HR has been great. Okay, there's been some things that have needed some work. Last week we got a message from HR, or a document from HR that said, yeah, fine, take what you need, leave what you don't, and we'll work on that. And that's what we're after. That's what you folks are after too. So we've got a good relationship with Norfolk County and its departments, and with council, and the MOE is going to make it even that much more strengthen that relationship. The MOE, just for the folks that don't know, is the memorandum of understanding that that we've worked on for the last 6 months that identifies these things and that tightens that relationship in a formal way, which we worked on with the county solicitor and the CAO.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Okay, thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so right now the library board is sitting at a 4% increase with a proposed budget of $2,845,800. So is there a mover for that or a proposed? Councillor Van Passen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Might as well carry on with my common theme. We've been working on trying to find savings where possible. We got to all share the pain, and I would move, here in the presentation, they don't have much wiggle room, so that means there is some. So I would move that we increase the levy by 2.1%, not the requested 3.99 or 4%.
By 2.1?
By 2.1, because that's the number I see on the board right now.
Is there a okay.
So we take last year's levy, give an extra 2.1% on top of that.
I just need the number, just what do you want to reduce the 4% from? Is that what you're proposing?
Yeah, reduce the 4% down to 2.1%.
Down to 2.1, okay.
However you want to look at it.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? If so, then I'll work on the calculations of what that works out to be. Councillor Michelli. So stand by and I'll actually get the number. $55, 543, 65. Is that 2,792,043? He's bringing it to 2.1 from the 4%. I'm sorry, I guess I don't really need, it's not that I have to approve that one on an individual basis then? Not like the Police Services Board or the Health Board? It would just be wrapped into the...
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's a grant that we give to the library board, so it would be reducing that grant
Correct,
amount.
but I don't have to make a separate I'll just get the approval down to 2.1%. It's not like the Health Board where I actually have to read out the number.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, sorry, my bad, I didn't realize. I just thought because it was a separate board. So, Councillor Van Passen's motion is to reduce the levy impact from 4% to 2.1%. Councillor Michelli seconded that motion. And any further discussion? All those in favor? And that is carried. Okay, next item. Any further discussion? All right, I think we're almost done, so, Counselor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have one more issue. I know I brought this up before. In the last 8 years, our reserves have gone from $48,000 to $48 million to $21.9 million. That's a decrease of $26 million. Our debt has increased from $28 million to $59.9 million. We've gone backwards by $57.3 million in the last 2 terms of this council. Our reserves are pathetic. A lot of our reserve funds are in negative balances. And I've been whining rather successfully all through our budget deliberations to reduce every little item, try to find savings, try to find potential future savings. And now I would like to make a motion to set $1 million into a council contingency reserve just in case something goes wrong, just in case something was underestimated, just in case problems come up we did not foresee. And if all else fails, it will still be there at the end of the year to put back into our reserve accounts that are way underfunded to start with. And I know that will sort of negate about half of the work we've done today, but we cannot continue going backwards by $6 or $7 million a year and still expect to be a solid financial entity another 4 years down the road. So it is a bit out of character for me to actually want to spend money or set aside money into the savings account, but I will put forth that motion and see if I can get a seconder.
The one thing, if I could jump in just before we move to that, is not only are the reserves down, but this goes to this whole idea that we've talked about all along. The fact that, yes, Norfolk County is to the far left in terms of what we're bringing in, what people are paying in property taxes. We know that. What I continuously, advocated against was simply raising taxes this year when we were looking at an 8.6% tax increase to fund non-essentials, the wants as opposed to the needs. And I think that it is prudent, as Councillor Van Passen said, to have a contingency for some items that may arise. But even more importantly, in my view, the community elected a new council. They want to see new and innovative ideas out of us. They want to see us do some work in the downtowns in Simcoe and in Delhi. And in order to do any projects like that, you have to have money. And in order, kind of to move forward, I think that it is a fantastic idea to set aside, we've got our expenses in line, we've whittled our budget down, staff has worked hard over the last month to put in their suggestions of things that perhaps were, wants and not needs. And now by adding that line item into the CAO's budget as strictly as a council-approved initiative line, for things like the downtown and so on, with the money to go to the reserve account if it is left over at the end of the year. I think that would be, it's a bold move. It's perhaps going to be a controversial move. But when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, we were looking at an 8.6% increase not all that long ago. So now we're looking at, with $1 million, my calculation somewhere around 3.6, 3.7. I even, I have never floated this idea out to them, but as everybody knows, I did my MBA at Ivy, and Ivy and Queens, depends who you talk to, is one of the best business schools in the country, and they do the entire teaching method is case-based. And one thing I thought would be really interesting would be to go to Ivy and create a case based on downtown Simcoe and tell the students, listen, you know, there's some of the most, the brightest students in the country, and say, if you had X number of dollars and you could go into downtown Simcoe, how would you go and spend the money? And not that we have to implement those, but at least get the ideas and have some public working groups, and maybe it's parking, you know, angled parking, or maybe it's flowers, or maybe it's concerts, or, you know, who knows, but at least this would give us the opportunity to actually be able to put the minds around this table to use. Number?
Through you, Madam Mayor, with the $1 million contingency reserve contribution, that brings us to 2.1% for your median household. Or sorry, 3.1, from 2.1% to 3.1%. So it adds 1% for your median household, and then it brings it up to $6.91 a month.
I thought 1% was 840,000.
You're correct, Madam Mayor, but we round to 1 decimal, so it's probably, it is 1%. So the 2.1, it was probably 2.13, and then that could be, do you want to expand the decimal?
No, I get
We're
it,
good?
but that's
Okay.
still 160,000. That just doesn't seem, you sure that's right? Oh, the library, well, we just took a chunk off as well, right?
Yes, that's true, yes.
And the meals, perfect. Even better. That's better than using on it hoped for initially. I was thinking it was going to be around 3.5. So, any discussions? Or sorry, do you have a seconder, first of all? Councillor Taylor. Any discussion? Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Mayor Chop, and through the Mayor to James, I just wanted to know if this is the creation of a new contingency or if we are planning on contributing to an existing contingency reserve, because I do believe that we had one, but I just wanted to clarify if we are actually creating a brand new reserve.
Councillor Van Passen.
Madam Mayor, it would be my intent that this is a brand-new one, and at the end of the year, council will decide whether it rolls it into the other existing reserves or whether it leaves it there. But it would be a new one all on its own, sort of under council control.
Councillor Huffman.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. Through you to Councillor Van Passen. So just to clarify, this savings fund is in place. So through the course of the fiscal year, if things come up, we have funds for them. And then at the end, things that weren't, the money that wasn't spent goes back in? Or you want it to just, I'm a little confused there.
The intent was that we're going to have enough other savings throughout the entire budget to fund any requirements. If not, this is a fallback position. There is going to be money set aside to deal with situations that come up or new ideas that are, want to be implemented. And at the end of the year, or well, at this time next year, or when we do the next year's budget, we will decide whether we leave it there, whether we add more to it, or whether we apply it to some of the other reserve funds that are very much underfunded currently, that we have like a 10-year plan to try to get them back to normal. We could speed up that program, but it's to set aside sort of the rainy day fund, and last time I went outside, it was starting to rain, so...
And just one more comment. So for transparency purposes, because this will obviously be something that individuals will be asking about, at this point in time, for transparency purposes, there's no set agenda for this money.
It's my sincere hope that we never have to tap into it, and that we can set it aside with our other reserves to pay for future items.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Maybe in 20 years. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Van Passen. So what you described as a contingency reserve is pretty much exactly what already exists. I appreciate the fact that you want to keep that separate, and we have the tools to keep it separate in our reserve schedules. To have another reserve account, like Kathy and I are actually trying to streamline our reserves. We have over 45 reserve accounts right now, and but the definition that you have just stated is by pretty much the definition of our existing contingency reserve fund, which is only sitting at $1.5 million, and we probably need at least 7 or 8 to prepare ourselves.
Councillor Van Passen.
Yeah, I went through all those reserve accounts are in the back of our one binder, and yeah, there are 45 or 50, but I noticed that about 80% of them are printed in red. And that is one of the reasons I'm bringing this forward, that we got to do a better job of keeping the bank account there. So.
I guess for myself, I have a different view of it, of the advantage to doing this. And to me, it would be for using it, if having it not as a contingency line, but as a council-approved initiative line under the CAO's budget. So that if we had public working groups to, again, address issues anywhere, if Waterford wanted to potentially look at putting, once they get the Bailey Bridge, of putting a roof over top to make it a covered bridge, there's the potential for items like that. But those types of things that are frills that we wouldn't be able to do. So for me, I guess if your motion is to support a contingency reserve, that wouldn't be what I would support. I would support it for a line item under the CAO's budget of council-approved initiatives. And if we don't, the idea is not that we have to go out and spend every dime of it. The idea is if there are good ideas that are supported by the council members that come forward through public consultation and so on, that we have now the ability to fund them. And if we don't use the entire amount at year's end, then we can do, as you say, we can put it into the reserve fund, we can roll it over into the following year, etc.
I think we're saying just about the same thing, that it is ultimately council will decide what to do, when to do, and any motion would be, a new council initiative with the added line to be funded from the council contingency reserve. And it is the same thing.
Well, you said you hoped you didn't spend the money, but I'm hoping that we do spend some
There's no need for
money.
it, then there's no need for it. But yeah, yeah, I suppose it's sort of like telling the kids that don't spend the money I just gave you.
Councillor Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Chop. I'm just thinking out loud here, but I would lean more towards your direction, even though I hear what you're saying, in the sense that we have just spent weeks going through this budget to find the savings to therefore replace it. We told the public that we would go through and make meaningful cuts and changes, and the overwhelming response from the community is they are okay with a tax increase if we're giving them something for their dollar value. And I think these projects we're talking about are something for their dollar value, and we've brought this budget right down. So I would have to side with Mayor Chop on that.
Okay, so, Councillor Huffman, Councillor Michelle, then yourself, then Councillor Taylor. The whole lineup.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. While I totally agree with your view of this and with Councillor Martin, I just do have to say that Councillor Van Passen kind of originally mentioned this account would be substantially different than the 45 or 50 others, 80% of which he said were in red. I wouldn't want this account to be sort of a, we've got this money, it's not really intended to be spent, but if we've come up with a good idea, we will. I just would want to make sure that we were very prudent about what we spend it on, rather than thinking, whenever somebody has a good idea, here we go. That will just get us right back kind of where we started, in my view.
Councillor Huffman?
Thank you, Mayor Chop. It's hard to say this I think there needs to be, slush fund probably isn't the correct word, James. Don't use that term. But We do rely a lot on our volunteer base in Norfolk County, where, and the Chamber of Commerce. I know Waterford, I know in Ward 7, it's not like a big Chamber of Commerce. We don't have big, businesses or a BIA or things like that. So Waterford, to me, Ward 7, is a great example of where something like this, where you can only get so much out of the population base that you have, and you're trying to grow certain things. So if there was a project, that would be something that I would see taking to this committee. Do I see it as something that we would just spend it because we had it? Absolutely not. It's not going to be like, a kid in a candy store and we're going to spend all of our money. And I think that, as Councillor Martin said, that it's when people can see things, they need to be tangible. I think everyone's human, and when you see something tangible where your tax dollars are at work, or where something, that's worth something. And any kind of money that we put back into Norfolk County is a benefit in the long run. So, but I certainly, so it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, but I like that half of the dozen better.
It's a little bit, there's just, again, there's great staff, there's great ideas that are out there, but we're also the people that were elected, and it would be nice to be able to make some decisions here, and go and try some of our own initiatives as well. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When I seconded that, I was certainly taking much of what you said into consideration as to how this fund could be used, and with Councillor Van Passen saying being able to TAC funded from the council contingency or council reserve as an initiative comes up. I see that as being the way to approach it. It's certainly using both ends of the half that Kim just said. And I think that is a great way to approach it.
Which way?
Being able to attack the funded from on the end of an initiative that comes forward. I think that's great.
Council approved.
Yes, council approved initiatives.
So, Councillor Van Passen, are you set that it needs to be a reserve fund? The only thing that concerns me just with your motion and the direction. We know whose wallet to steal. So my only reason for my clarification is just that your intention, so that the public, so we're clear, yours was that your hope is that we don't spend any of the money. My hope is that we find some really great ideas and we spend some of the money. So this is where we're just.
All you got to do is convince me it's a good idea.
Okay. Councillor Columbus.
Well, there's always been a mayor and council services grant, which we fund festivals from. People apply for that for special projects. You may recall we dealt with that a while ago. So maybe we should have created a pot when we're going through our budget, put some more money in there rather than $1 per resident. I think that's what it is, isn't that, Jane? We put $1 per Norfolk resident, which is $65,000. And that's where the festival money comes from in any special projects. So maybe we should have topped that one up rather than take those dollars that Councillor Van Passen.
I know it's unorthodox and I know it's different, but I don't know. I think that, again, I can't express enough that there's a new council, people elected us, they want to see some ideas from us. It's an opportunity for us to have a fund to just go and have public working groups and so on and work from there. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. If I may, I don't see this fund as like a festival grant type fund unless we're talking Mumford and Sons Festival. It would need to be something bigger. We would need to be tapping into it for something that's going to revitalize a downtown or something along those lines. And additionally, while we're on the topic of that grant, I would love to see the county and staff give some consideration to services and donating of spaces and not giving away tangible money necessarily always to the public, but how can we, in-kind gifts, how can we provide better grant services to the public?
Was that a hoorah? Okay, that wasn't a question. Okay.
No, and to kind of follow up with that, one of the things that I'm kind of currently in the process of working on is, for example, our Lions Club in Waterford puts all their money back into the community, and all of it. So they do this massive skate-a-thon this Saturday, and I don't think that we, as the county, should charge them for ice time. I just don't, because they help us in so many ways, the county, with the things that they fund. And then at our Health and Social Services meeting last month, we found out that with the, correct, Marlene, sorry, the program that they're looking at having the Lions help out with, the vision screening, that we're looking at relying on our local Lions Service Club members all across Norfolk County to help with this program for screening vision of pre-kindergarten kids. And so all of a sudden I'm like, and we're charging them ice time to raise money to put back into the community. Those types of things I see as, that's a great way to I think help keep that volunteer base energized and feeling that they're valued.
I agree.
So.
I think we need some more work with that across the board, other than just tapping into this fund, but definitely on that track, absolutely. Councillor Rabbits?
Thank you, Mayor Chop, and through the mayor, I would like to ask Councillor Taylor if he is still seconding Councillor Van Passen's original motion, because I do believe that the mayor has proposed a alternative that's not in keeping with the original intent of the motion for the reserve fund, and I think it's prudent for us at this juncture, and I realize it is getting late and we're getting into a healthy debate at this point in time, that I think it would be prudent for us to at least deal with this motion, and if it's successful, then we have our answer. If it's unsuccessful, we'll be able to consider the alternative that you have provided to us.
Has the alternative been prepared?
Well, no, well, we would dispense with this one first,
Oh,
unless Councillor Van Passen wants to clarify the, Councillor Huffman?
I don't think that we need an alternative. Councillor Van Passen can't dictate on his own that none of the money is going to be spent per se, right? So
I would suggest the only difference is I used the terminology of a council contingency reserve, and the mayor is proposing it that it be a line item in the CAO budget thing, that same money sits in the same place.
I'm fine with putting it in an account.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a council-approved initiative account or something,
Yeah.
so it's not another reserve account.
Yeah.
Would you be amenable to something like that?
But I would still like, if the motion has been moved and seconded, let's vote on it. If it fails, the mayor, I'm sure, will leave the chair, bring forth another motion, and it'll come back.
Just one clarification from Mr. Johnson here.
Yeah. So thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I just want to say thank you, Councillor Van Passen. This is an excellent idea, no matter how it goes. The question I have for council is, do you require a council resolution to use these funds? And if you do require a council resolution to use these funds, then that is a characteristic of a reserve. And usually when we are thinking about using large amount of funds, there's a council report that comes along, and in our financial services comments, we say, we're going to fund this from X amount of whatever reserve we have. And in this case, we would fund it from whatever name we give this reserve. So if that's the characteristics of this fund, then that's what I would suggest. And then at the end of the year, we would decide what to do with the balance of the reserves, of that particular reserve, whether if we have a deficit situation to offset it, or we keep it, or what have you.
How about a council initiative reserve? Perfect. Okay, so mover. Councilor Michelle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought that that's what we were talking about in the first place, and I think we've been kind of almost debating two different motions. And I think we need to, I think the key to Councillor Van Passen's motion was that it would be council approved. And I think that's the key element in that motion. I think
It was always council approved.
Yes, and
The only challenge was Councillor Van Passen. What concerned me at the beginning was the statement that the idea was for us to not touch it at all and then roll it into the reserve account. Where we sort of differed was the fact that I view the funds as an opportunity for the minds around this table to be able to, come to council and say, hey, through my Simcoe Downtown Working Group, we've had public consultation, and these are some things that we would like to do. Can we get the approval to do this? So, but now Councillor Van Passen's in agreement that he can be convinced to use the funds. Councillor Van Passen.
If I could, friendly amendment to my motion and call it the council initiative reserve so that it's not confused with an existing council contingency reserve. Would that solve
Council
a lot of
Initiative
this?
Reserve, that sounds great. Seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favor? Carried. Yeah. I kept it quiet. Did you like that? Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before we conclude, which I think is sneaking up very quickly, I would very much like to thank our staff. These 309 pages of more detailed budget, they were very helpful, gave me a better understanding of the workings of a corporation of this size and a $225 million budget and where the pennies are going. It's nice to know where the dollars are going, but I like to count the pennies as well. And it was a little bit boring going through some of it, but I found it very helpful, and I would like to thank staff for getting that out to us. So.
I agree. It made all the difference in the world. It's fantastic. Councillor Hoffman.
I just want to tag on to that. This was wonderful, but also the one we got today. Phenomenal. Thank you. This one. To me, that meant that we were all kind of on the same page, and we all wanted what was best for the corporation and for the county and for all the taxpayers. And I think that you guys really went down into the weeds and helped us out greatly with putting some cuts already out there. So thank you very much to the SLT team and all the staff.
Absolutely.
It sounds like we're winding down here, so I wanted to take this opportunity, very much appreciate the kind words. I would love to take credit for it, but I'd probably take credit for 1%. 99% of it is Kathy and her crew. However, we wouldn't have been able to put these lists together without the help of ladies and gentlemen in the back of the room and Mr. Slichenkov in the corner over there, as well as all their support staff and the staff here in finance. So this was an interesting budget deliberation, to say the least. And with that, thank you very much.
Councillors, good job as well. Oh, we need, yep, well, don't everybody leave yet. We're not done. We're not done. I know it wasn't by lunchtime, but 4:20 is pretty good. So close. right, I have a motion before me that report FS 19-03 regarding the proposed 2019 levy-supported operating budget be received as information, and that the 2019 levy-supported operating budget with a net levy requirement of $89,874,100 be approved, and further, that any surplus or deficit generated from general operations be contributed to or offset from the contingency reserve, and further, that council approve staff attendance at out-of-province staff development and training as outlined in section 5, pages 5-4 and 5-8 of the proposed 2019 levy-supported operating budget document. Do I have a mover? Councillor Martin, and seconded by Councillor Huffman. All those in favor? That's carried. All right. Woohoo! Hang on, I think we have to adjourn.
Confirming bylaw.
Hang on.
Next, yeah.
Stand by, everybody, two more. That bylaw 2019-08 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council on the 23rd, 24th days of January and the 20th day of February 2019 pass, signed by the mayor and county clerk and affixed with the corporate seal. A mover and a seconder. Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Rabbits. All those in favor? And one more. That council be adjourned at 4:20 p.m. and that is moved by Councillor Geisens and seconded by Councillor Columbus. All those in favor? That's carried.